I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Not in a million years. I mean, school lockdowns were just drills, right? We'd practice them a few times a year, the usual routine. Teachers would lock the doors, we'd all huddle in a corner, and they'd tell us it was just practice. But this time, it was different. The fear in our teachers' eyes said it all. It was real. It all began on a gloomy Friday morning. The rain was pelting against the classroom windows, creating a rhythmic drumming that provided an eerie backdrop to our mundane history lesson. I had just started to drift into my own world, daydreaming about the weekend ahead, when the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Attention, students and staff." Principal Wilson's voice echoed through the room, filled with an unusual tension. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Lockdown procedures are now in effect." For a moment, my brain couldn't process what I had just heard. Lockdown, not a drill. The class fell silent as our teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, rushed to the door and locked it. The sharp click of the lock sent a shiver down my spine. "Okay, everyone, get to the corner, away from the windows," she said, her voice trembling. "And be as quiet as possible." I followed the rest of the class to the designated corner, my heart pounding in my chest. The only sound was the relentless rain outside, and the murmur of worried voices, all of us wondering the same thing. What was happening? My mind raced, filled with thoughts of all the terrible things that could be causing this lockdown. I glanced around at my classmates, their faces etched with fear and confusion. I'd never seen them like this before. There was Jake, who always had a joke ready, now pale and trembling, and Emily, who was normally the confident one, was holding her breath like the rest of us. We waited, huddled together, for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Mrs. Reynolds had her phone out, trying to get updates, but the Wi-Fi signal was down, and the cell reception was weak. The silence was deafening. All I could think about was the what-ifs. What if this was a school shooter? What if they found us? What if we didn't make it out of here alive? The fear was suffocating, and I just wanted to be anywhere but there. Then there was a faint sound, distant, but growing louder. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. My heart raced, and I could hear the thud of each beat in my chest. Mrs. Reynolds motioned for us to stay silent as she held her phone up to her ear, desperately trying to get some information. The footsteps grew closer, and my breath caught in my throat. This was it. The moment I realized I was trapped in a nightmare. I could feel the tension in the room, the shared terror that bound us all together. And then, the door handle jiggled. My heart was in my throat as I watched the doorknob turn slowly. The door was locked, but I knew that wouldn't keep someone determined out for long. Mrs. Reynolds was on the phone, whispering for help, but there was no response. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the creeping fear that was crawling through me. The footsteps stopped just outside our door. I could hear the heavy breathing of someone on the other side, and the faintest whisper of a voice, too low to make out any words. I wasn't sure if we were about to face the unimaginable, but then, as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps retreated. They faded away into the distance, and we were left in the eerie silence once again. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. Who had been outside our door? What did they want? And why did they leave without entering the room? I needed answers, but the phone call with Mrs. Reynolds had been fruitless. We remained huddled in that corner, listening to the rain and the sound of our own racing hearts. Time passed like a blur, and I kept thinking about my family, my friends, and all the things I'd taken for granted. It was like a weight pressing down on me, suffocating my hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the intercom crackled to life once more. Principal Wilson's voice came through, shaky but determined. "The threat has been neutralized," he announced. "You may now exit your classrooms." The relief that washed over me was indescribable. We unlocked the door and cautiously stepped out, the hallway echoing with the sound of hushed conversations. As I made my way to my next class, I couldn't help but wonder about the person who had been outside our door. What had their intentions been, and why had they left? The mystery lingered, but I was just grateful to be alive and reunited with my classmates. I've learned something that day, something that goes beyond textbooks and history lessons. I've learned that life can take the darkest, most unexpected turns, and when it does, all you can do is hold on, survive, and be grateful for every precious moment. This wasn't a story I ever expected to tell, but it's one that reminds me that we can endure and overcome even the most terrifying of situations. I never thought I'd be the one trapped outside when the nightmare began. Let me tell you, it was a rainy Tuesday morning, and as I rushed towards the school entrance, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my backpack, loaded with unfinished homework and a sandwich hastily thrown together. The drizzle soaked my hoodie as I scurried across the parking lot. The bell had just rung, signaling the start of another monotonous school day. As I reached the entrance, the heavy metal doors felt unusually cold beneath my clammy fingers. But I paid it no mind. After all, what could possibly go wrong on an ordinary school day? I stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the sound of my sneakers echoing through the empty corridors. The lockers lined the walls, silent sentinels guarding the secrets and stories of countless students. I was just about to round the corner to my first class when a loud, jarring alarm cut through the air. My heart leaped into my throat, and I froze, panic instantly flooding my veins. I'd never heard that alarm before, and from the stricken faces of the few students scattered around me, it was clear they hadn't either. "What's going on?" I muttered to a girl clutching her books nearby. She just shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. In a split second, the voice of our principal, Mr. Thompson, crackled through the intercom. His usually composed voice was strained. "Attention, students and staff. We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Find a classroom, lock the doors, and hide. Do not open them for anyone until further notice." My heart was now pounding so loudly in my chest that I could hardly hear my own thoughts. A lockdown? But why? How? We'd practiced these drills, but this was the real deal. I had no choice but to scramble toward the nearest classroom, the heavy dread sinking into my stomach. The classroom door was just inches away when it slammed shut right before my eyes. I had been too slow, too late. My heart was now in a full-on sprint, and I banged on the door, frantic and desperate, my voice trembling as I begged. "Let me in. Please let me in." Inside, through the small glass window on the door, I saw Mrs. Henderson, my English teacher, her eyes brimming with tears. She seemed torn, wanting to help but trapped by the fear and uncertainty that had gripped us all. "I'm sorry," she mouthed through the glass, then disappeared from sight as she joined the others in the corner of the classroom. I was alone in the hallway. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave. Where could I hide? What could I do? The seconds ticked away like hours, and I couldn't shake the image of whatever had triggered this lockdown, bursting through the exit door. A moment of clarity pierced the fog of my fear, and I sprinted to the nearest restroom. The sound of the rain outside was deafening, providing the perfect cover for my frantic sobs as I crouched in a stall, huddled against the cold tile floor. I waited, my breath racked, for what felt like an eternity. I could hear faint, muffled voices and footsteps in the hallway. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. Was there an intruder in the school? Someone with a weapon? Were my friends and teachers safe? The minutes turned to hours, or so it felt, my sense of time unraveling. And then the footsteps grew louder, heavier. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. They were approaching the restroom. The entrance door creaked open, and I could hear someone entering. The sound of their footsteps, slow and deliberate, sent shivers down my spine. It was as if my whole life had led to this moment, this unbearable silence in a bathroom stall, waiting for a threat that could be lurking just outside. The footsteps moved closer, echoing off the cold tiles, then stopped right in front of my stall. My mind was a whirlwind of terror, my breath shallow, my heart a relentless drumbeat. I had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed, and so certain that my life was about to end. In the cramped space beneath the stall door, I saw the shadow of someone's shoes. They were standing right there, just inches away. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to make a sound, to do something, but I was paralyzed by fear. And then, inexplicably, the footsteps moved away, receding back into the hallway. I remained frozen, waiting for some indication that the danger had passed. Minutes dragged on, and finally, I summoned the courage to open the stall door just a crack. The hallway was empty. There was no sign of the intruder. I stumbled out of the restroom, my legs like jelly, and made my way to the nearest classroom door, where Mrs. Henderson had turned to the window. She gasped when she saw me. "You're okay," she said, relief washing over her face. Thank goodness. I collapsed into a desk, my body trembling with the realization that I had narrowly escaped whatever horror had unfolded in the hallways. The lockdown continued for what felt like an eternity, but eventually, the intercom crackled to life once more. "The threat has been neutralized," Mr. Thompson announced. "You may now exit your classrooms." As the classroom door swung open, my classmates and I spilled out into the hallway, our faces marked by a mixture of fear and relief. I clung to my friends, feeling the warmth of their presence and the reality of our shared survival. I can't explain the terror I felt that day, being locked out during a school lockdown, but I can tell you that I'm grateful to be here, telling the tale. And I've learned that life can change in an instant, and sometimes you find strength and resilience in the most unexpected of places, like a restroom stall. You know, there's something incredibly eerie about the moment a school day begins. The quiet halls, the smell of freshly waxed floors, and the anticipatory buzz of students heading to their classrooms. It's a kind of quiet hopefulness, like a blank canvas waiting to be painted with knowledge. But there was one day when that hopefulness gave way to sheer terror. It all started just like any other day. I shuffled into my high school, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes half open. It was a Wednesday, which meant I was already wishing it was Friday. The familiar drone of early morning chatter filled the air, punctuated by the occasional laughter and the slam of lockers. But this particular Wednesday would turn out to be unlike any other. As I stumbled to board my first class, the bell rang, and I knew I was cutting it close. I quickened my pace, reaching the classroom door just as it closed behind me. I was out of breath, and a small, apologetic smile was all I could manage when Mrs. Thompson, my English teacher, gave me an exasperated look. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. But then, everything changed. An ear-piercing alarm blared throughout the building. I could see the confusion in Mrs. Thompson's eyes, and it mirrored the bewildered expressions on my classmates' faces. That wasn't the fire alarm, the tornado alarm, or even the intruder drill. It was something entirely different, something I'd never heard before. "Attention, students and staff," came the crackling voice over the loudspeakers. It was Mr. Smith, our principal, but he sounded off. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Lockdown procedures are in effect. Find a secure location and lock all doors." Panic set in instantly. This wasn't a drill. What was happening? The class leaped into action, rushing to the windows to pull the blinds and locking the door. I scanned the room for a good place to hide. The closet, too obvious, behind the teacher's desk. No, they'd look there first. While my classmates found their spots, I decided to hide under a table at the back of the room. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best I could come up with in the heat of the moment. I slid under, trying to control my shaky breath. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears. The minutes crept by like hours, and all I could do was wait. I couldn't help but let my mind wander into terrifying territory. What was this threat? Who was behind it? My imagination conjured up horrific scenarios, and I was paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, uneven steps that seemed to echo in the silence. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle my own panicked breathing. The steps grew louder, closer, until they finally reached the classroom door. The doorknob jiggled, and my heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I thought about all the things I'd never get to do: graduate, go to college, see the world. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the door stopped shaking and the footsteps retreated. My classmates and I collectively held our breath, waiting for another sign of danger. Time dragged on, and I was consumed by my own fear. Then Mr. Smith's voice came over the intercom once more. "The threat has been neutralized. It is safe to exit your classrooms." We all stared at each other, disbelief etched on our faces. Slowly, we unlocked the classroom door and stepped into the hallway. Teachers and students poured out of other classrooms, their eyes wild with fear. Some were crying, others hugging each other tightly. It was as though we'd all survived a catastrophe. I tried to make sense of what had just happened, but nothing added up. The hallway seemed different, the air heavy with an unshakable dread. As I joined the disoriented crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. And then I saw him. Principal Smith stood at the end of the hallway, his eyes wide, his suit disheveled. He was talking to a police officer, but the words were lost in the chaos around me. I felt a strange pull, a need to approach them. As I got closer, I heard fragments of their conversation. "No one saw him," the police officer was saying. "It's like he disappeared into thin air." "I can't explain it," Mr. Smith replied. "He was here one moment, and then he just vanished." My heart dropped. The description they were giving fit the intruder, the person who had tried to enter our classroom. But I hadn't seen anyone else in that hallway. And then it hit me. I was the last one to enter the classroom. What if they were talking about me? I approached Mr. Smith and the police officer, my voice quivering as I asked, "What happened? Who were you looking for?" They both turned to me, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. "We were looking for the intruder," the police officer said. "The one who tried to get into your classroom. We have no idea where he went." My heart raced and my mind spun. I realized that, somehow, in my haste to get to class, I had become the threat. I had been the one trying to get into the classroom, my classmates locked away in fear, thinking someone was trying to harm them. The realization washed over me like a wave of ice-cold dread. I was the cause of the lockdown, the source of the terror that had gripped the entire school. The guilt and shame flooded my veins, and I stood there, feeling like a monster in the midst of the chaos I had unknowingly created. It was a nightmare that I would never forget, one that would haunt me for the rest of my days. In the end, I learned that sometimes the real horror isn't a faceless threat in the shadows, but the darkness that can reside within ourselves. And it's a darkness that can turn an ordinary school day into a nightmare beyond imagination. I've always been a skeptic, you know. I never bought into the whole UFO craze. It was just people's wild imaginations and blurry photos, or so I thought. But then, that one night changed everything, and now I can't shake the fear that I wasn't alone in that darkness. It was a typical evening. I had just finished a long day at the office and was unwinding with a glass of wine in my dimly lit living room. Rain tapped lightly against the window, creating a soothing background noise. I'd always found comfort in the rain, the way it washed away the day's troubles. As I sat there, Lost in thought, I noticed something odd outside my window. A soft pulsating light, like a distant star, hovered in the cloudy sky. It was too bright and too low to be a star, but I dismissed it as a plane or perhaps a helicopter, though the thought of it hovering so strangely nagged at me. I sipped my wine and tried to put it out of my mind, but that light was persistent, like a beacon calling me into the night. It drew me to the window, and as I gazed at it, I realized that it wasn't alone. It was joined by more lights, forming an eerie triangle in the sky. An uneasy feeling washed over me. I hadn't been a believer in alien abductions or close encounters, but those lights were too strange to ignore. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside to get a better look, my curiosity driving me to the edge of my sanity. The air was damp and cool, and the rain left a faint drizzle on my skin. The lights above me had now transformed into a geometric pattern, and they seemed to be getting closer. I raised my phone to record what was happening. The lights danced and swirled, and I was too entranced to notice that my phone screen flickered and died. And then, in the blink of an eye, those lights were right above me. The world spun into chaos as I felt a force pulling me upward, and my body was swallowed by darkness. Panic gripped my heart, and my mind raced with thoughts of what could be happening. It was like a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. When I regained consciousness, I was in a place that defied all logic and reason. I was lying on a cold metallic surface in a room that seemed to stretch into infinity. The walls were curved and adorned with strange, luminescent symbols that cast an eerie bluish glow. The air was heavy, and I could barely breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of it all. As I sat up, I realized that I wasn't alone. Surrounding me were other people, all in a state of shock, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. It was as if we were all part of some twisted experiment, trapped in an alien nightmare. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. It was as if the very air around us was sapping our will and our ability to resist. And then they appeared. The beings that entered the room were unlike anything I could have ever imagined. Tall and slender, their skin was a pale, translucent blue, and their eyes were large and black, devoid of any emotion. They moved with an otherworldly grace, and their near presence sent shivers down my spine. I watched as they approached each person in the room, their long, delicate fingers touching our foreheads, as if scanning our thoughts. It was invasive and terrifying, and I couldn't help but wonder what they were searching for. As they reached me, their eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a surge of fear unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as if they were peering into the very depths of my soul, and I couldn't hide the fear that coursed through me. And then they spoke. Their voices were like a discordant melody, a series of high-pitched tones and clicks that reverberated through my mind. It was a language I couldn't understand, and yet their intentions were clear. They were searching for something deep within us. I felt their probing, their intrusion into my thoughts, and I couldn't stop the memories that flooded to the surface. Memories of my skepticism, my disbelief in the existence of extraterrestrial life. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. They had abducted us not just to study us, but to plant a seed of belief in the existence of their kind. They were using us as messengers, as living proof that they were real, and that the world needed to acknowledge their presence. As the beings finished their examination, they retreated, leaving us in a state of shock and confusion. The room began to fade, the metallic walls melting away, and I found myself back in the dark, rainy night where it had all begun. I stumbled back into my house, drenched and disoriented. The clock on the wall showed that only minutes had passed, but it felt like an eternity. My skepticism had been shattered, replaced by an undeniable reality. I had been an unwitting pawn in an extraterrestrial agenda, and I had witnessed things that no one would ever believe. Now I'm left with the knowledge that we are not alone in the universe, and that the truth is far stranger and more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined. The fear of the unknown, of what lies beyond the stars, lingers in the darkest corners of my mind, a constant reminder that the world is not as it seems. All right, sit down, my friend, because I've got a story that's going to chill you to the bone. You know, they say that truth is stranger than fiction, and this is one of those tales that make you question reality. It all started one warm summer night, a few years back. I was out in the countryside, stargazing with a group of friends. The sky was clear, and the Milky Way stretched above us like a cosmic highway. We laughed and pointed out constellations, blissfully unaware that our lives were about to take a wild turn. As the night wore on, the air seemed to grow still. An eerie calm settled over us. It's funny how you can sense something's off, even when everything appears normal. I looked at my friends, and their expressions mirrored my unease. That's when it happened. The sky, which had been filled with the shimmering dance of stars, suddenly went dark. No, it wasn't a cloud passing by. It was as if someone had thrown a celestial curtain over the universe. We froze, unable to tear our eyes away from the unnatural darkness above. I remember thinking that this had to be some sort of celestial event, like a solar eclipse, even though it made no sense. It was nighttime, after all, and then it descended upon us, a blinding light that came from nowhere, illuminating the field and casting out long distorted shadows. The light enveloped us, bathing everything in a ghostly ethereal glow. I could hear my friends screaming, but their voices seemed muffled and far away. That's when they arrived. Beings that were nothing like the benign, big-eyed, green figures we'd seen in movies. They were taller than any human, with elongated limbs and a cold, calculating presence. Their eyes were dark voids that seemed to absorb the very light around them. I felt small and insignificant in their presence. Before I knew it, I was floating, not in the peaceful, weightless way that astronauts describe, but in a terrifying, otherworldly manner. I was being drawn upward, toward the hovering craft, and all I could do was stare in horror as the world I knew grew smaller and smaller. I remember thinking about my family, my friends, and everything I'd never get to do. I wasn't ready to leave this world, to leave them behind. It was a feeling of helplessness and despair that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Inside the spacecraft, things became even stranger. It was like a sterile metal chamber, with a low hum in the background that sent shivers down my spine. There were no visible doors or openings, yet I was somehow inside. The beings surrounded me, and I could feel their thoughts probing my mind. It was invasive, like they were dissecting my very soul. I saw flashes of memories my entire life laid bare before them. I tried to resist, to shield my thoughts, but it was like trying to stop a tsunami with my bare hands. That's when I realized the truth. These beings weren't visitors from another planet. They were interdimensional, transcending our understanding of reality. They didn't want to study us or make contact. They wanted something else, something I couldn't comprehend. Suddenly, the spacecraft shuddered, and I was thrown to the floor. I could hear the aliens chattering in their incomprehensible language, their dark eyes filled with a sense of urgency. I had no idea what was happening, but it felt like the ship was in turmoil. And then, a voice filled my mind, not one of the aliens, but something else, something ancient and powerful. It told me that I needed to escape, that the beings were after a part of my consciousness that they could never truly possess. As the ship rocked and trembled, I summoned every ounce of strength and willpower. With a burst of energy, I propelled myself forward, escaping the chamber and tumbling into a narrow, dimly lit corridor. Alien beings pursued me, their forms shifting and morphing as if reality itself was warping around them. I knew I had to find a way out, to return to my world, but the ship was like a labyrinth of endless identical passages. As I ran, the corridor seemed to stretch out infinitely before me, like a nightmarish dream. The walls began to close in, and I could feel the life being squeezed out of me. I was trapped in a nightmarish maze, pursued by creatures from beyond the stars. Just when I thought I was doomed, the corridor suddenly opened into a blinding white light. I staggered forward and found myself back in the field, where it had all begun. The night sky had returned, and the spacecraft was gone. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath, my body bruised and battered. I had escaped, but I knew that I had been forever changed by the experience. I couldn't forget the beings, their inscrutable motives, or the voice that had guided me to escape. And here is the plot twist, my friend. As I lay in that field, I realized that I was no longer alone. The beings had left something inside me, a fragment of their consciousness. I could feel their presence in my mind, a haunting, inescapable presence that would forever bind me to the unknown. I wish I could say that the experience ended that night, that I returned to my ordinary life, but the truth is far more unsettling. I continue to have encounters with the beings, brief moments of contact that remind me that they're always there, just beyond the veil of our reality. So the next time you look up at the night sky, remember that the universe is vast and mysterious, and that there are things out there that defy our understanding. And who knows, one day you might find yourself on a journey to the other side of reality, where the boundaries of time and space blur, and the true horrors of the unknown are revealed. You know, there are some things in life that you never think will happen to you. Alien abductions, for instance. We've all heard the stories, seen the movies, but I was the ultimate skeptic. Until that fateful night. It was a typical evening. I had just finished a late shift at the office, and all I wanted to do was get home, eat a microwave dinner, and catch up on some TV. The last thing on my mind was extraterrestrial encounters. Little did I know, the universe had other plans. As I stepped out of the elevator and into the dimly lit parking garage, I was immediately struck by a sense of unease. You know that feeling when you're being watched? Well, I had it in spades. My footsteps echoed through the concrete labyrinth, the only sound in that eerie silence. I tried to shake off the irrational fear as I approached my car. That's when I saw it. A blinding light, unlike any I'd ever seen, filled the garage. It was like a miniature sun, and it cast stark, sharp shadows on everything around it. The sensation of dread intensified, but I couldn't look away. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and then everything went black. I awoke in a place that defied logic, in a world beyond my wildest dreams or worse nightmares. The room I was in was small and metallic, and it was filled with an otherworldly bluish glow. The air was heavy, and it felt charged, like static electricity was running through every inch of my body. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone. There were others in the room with me, each in a state of shock and confusion. We all exchanged terrified glances, silently questioning what had brought us here. The door slid open, revealing beings that defied the laws of nature. Tall and willowy, their skin had a pearlescent quality, reflecting the eerie blue light. Their eyes, large and black, seemed to pierce through to my very soul. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, paralyzed by their presence. These beings didn't speak in any language I could understand. Their voices were like an eerie, dissonant melody, rising and falling in an alien cadence. It sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but wonder what they wanted. As they approached, I could feel their thoughts probing my mind, invasive and uninvited. I saw flashes of memories, intimate moments, and secrets laid bare before them. They weren't studying us, they were dissecting us, tearing through the very fabric of our existence. The fear was overwhelming, and I couldn't stop the thoughts and emotions from flooding to the surface. Memories of loved ones, regrets, and unfulfilled dreams played like a cruel slideshow in my mind. As they examined each person in the room, I realized the horrifying truth. They were searching for something within us, something deep and intrinsic. It was as if they were trying to extract a part of our consciousness, to take it for themselves. And then it happened. The room shuddered, and the beings reacted with a sense of urgency. They gathered in the center of the chamber, communicating in their strange, melodic language. It was clear that something had gone wrong, something beyond their control. As the ship trembled, I knew this was my chance to escape. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed myself forward, lunging toward the doorway. The beings barely had time to react, their long, slender forms reaching out in vain as I slipped past them. I stumbled into a narrow corridor, my heart pounding in my chest. It was like a maze, the walls curving and shifting as if they were alive. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to find a way out. The corridor seemed endless, each step taking me farther from the chamber where the beings were. I felt like I was running for my life, the walls closing in on me. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind, and I pushed myself to go faster. But just when I thought I was trapped, the corridor opened up into blinding white light. I stepped into it, and the world seemed to spin and shift around me. It was like being caught in a vortex, and I had no control over my own movements. And then I was back on Earth. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath, the cool grass against my skin. I was in a field, the night sky stretching out above me, and the spacecraft was gone. I couldn't believe it. It was like waking up from a nightmare, back in the world I knew. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented and shaken. I had escaped, but I couldn't forget the memories of what had happened. The beings, their incomprehensible motives, and the haunting sense that they were still out there. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching, waiting. The memories of the abduction haunted me, and I knew that the truth was far stranger than I could have ever imagined. And here's the twist, my friend. The nightmares didn't stop. They got worse. Vivid dreams of being back in that chamber, the probing thoughts, the dissection of my consciousness. It was as if the beings had left a part of themselves behind, a connection that transcended time and space. As the dreams continued, I began to understand the truth. I hadn't escaped the aliens. I had become one with them. My consciousness was now linked to theirs, and I was a part of their world, a world beyond human comprehension. It was a chilling realization, one that left me with more questions than answers. What did they want with us? Why had they chosen me? And what was the purpose of this connection? So, my friend, the next time you look up at the night sky, remember that the universe is vast and mysterious, and there are forces out there that we can't begin to understand. The truth is out there, waiting to be discovered, and sometimes it's far more terrifying than we could ever imagine. You know, I've always been a fan of horror movies. The suspense, the thrill, the chills down your spine. There's something about being scared out of your wits that's oddly exhilarating. But little did I know that one day I would find myself in a real-life horror story on the set of a film that was destined to be cursed. It all started when I landed a job as a production assistant on a low-budget horror movie. The set was located in an old, run-down mansion on the outskirts of town, and the atmosphere was just right for a creepy film. Creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and ancient furniture that looked like it had seen better days. It was the perfect setting for a haunted house flick. As soon as I set foot on the set, there was a strange vibe in the air. Call it intuition, but something about the place just didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way the crew hushed when I entered the room, or the whispers about strange occurrences on set. Regardless, I brushed it off as typical set nerves and got to work. The first few days went by without a hitch. We were filming scenes of suspense and terror, and the atmosphere was electric. But then, things started to get weird. Props would move on their own, lights flickered without explanation, and crew members reported hearing eerie voices when no one else was around. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was off about this place, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was genuinely haunted. It was as if the past residents of the house were still lingering, and they weren't too pleased about our intrusion. One evening, after a particularly grueling shoot, I was tasked with locking up the set. The rest of the crew had already left, and I was alone in that eerie mansion. The silence was oppressive, and I could hear the faint rustling of the wind outside. I locked the main door and began making my way to the exit, trying to ignore the unsettling sensation that I was being watched. That's when I heard it, a soft, mournful wail that sent shivers down my spine. It was a woman's voice, distant yet clear, and it seemed to be coming from the depths of the mansion. My heart pounded, and I had to muster all the courage I had to investigate. I ventured further into the mansion, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The voice grew louder, more desperate, and it led me to a locked door in the basement. It was old and heavy, but I managed to pry it open. The sight that met my eyes will haunt me forever. In the dim light of the basement, I saw a ghostly figure, a woman in a tattered dress, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. She whispered something I couldn't quite make out, and her presence sent waves of dread through my body. I stumbled back, terror clawing at my throat. I knew then that this mansion was no ordinary movie set, and the ghostly woman was proof of the curse that had plagued the production. I tried to tell the director and the crew about what I'd seen, but they brushed it off as stress-induced hallucinations. No one wanted to entertain the idea of a real haunting, not when the success of the film was on the line. As the days went by, the strange occurrences on set escalated. Objects moved of their own accord, and the crew grew increasingly uneasy. There was a tangible fear in the air, and I couldn't help but think that we were playing with forces we didn't understand. One night, as we filmed the climactic scene of the movie, the unthinkable happened. The ghostly woman I'd encountered in the basement materialized on set. She stood there, her eyes filled with anguish, and her presence sent shockwaves of terror through the cast and crew. The director, a skeptical man to the core, couldn't deny what he was seeing. He ordered the cameras to keep rolling and the actors to react as if the ghostly figure was a part of the scene. It was a surreal and horrifying experience, as the boundaries between reality and fiction blurred. As the scene unfolded, the woman's whispers grew louder, and it was clear that she was trying to communicate something. The actors reacted with genuine fear, their performances driven by the very real terror that hung in the air. And then it happened. In the final moments of the scene, the ghostly woman reached out and touched one of the actors. The actor's expression contorted in agony, and he screamed in pain as he collapsed to the ground. Chaos erupted on set as the crew rushed to the actor's side. He was unconscious, and it was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. The director, now pale and terrified, ordered everyone to stop filming, and the crew frantically called for an ambulance. As the actor was rushed to the hospital, I couldn't help but wonder if the curse of the mansion had claimed its first victim. The line between fiction and reality had blurred, and the horror we had been trying to capture on film had become all too real. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been witness to something beyond my understanding. The curse of the mansion was real, and it had taken a dark and terrible turn. The ghosts of the past were not content to remain in the shadows. They were determined to make their presence known. And here's the plot twist, my friend. After that fateful night, the movie was never completed. The director and crew were too shaken to continue, and the footage we had was considered too disturbing to release. The mansion was abandoned, left to the spirits that dwelled within. But the curse of that movie set didn't end there. In the following months, the crew members who had been on set that night began to disappear one by one. It was as if the ghostly woman had taken her revenge, claiming those who had invaded her home. I was the last one left, haunted by the memories of that night and the knowledge that I was next. The mansion called to me, its cursed walls whispering my name. I couldn't escape the feeling that the ghostly woman was watching, waiting for me to return. And return I did. One moonless night, I found myself drawn back to the mansion, unable to resist its siren call. As I stepped through the rotting door, the past and present blurred, and I became a part of the curse that had haunted that movie set. So, my friend, the next time you watch a horror movie, remember that the line between fiction and reality can be thin. Sometimes, the horror is not just on the screen. It can be all too real, lurking in the shadows and waiting to claim those who dare to enter its domain. Alright, let me take you on a little journey, one that still gives me the creeps when I think about it. It all started when I got a job as a production assistant on a low-budget horror movie. The set was an old, run-down mansion, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The mansion was a character in its own right, the perfect backdrop for a spooky movie. It had that classic haunted house look, creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and antique furniture that had seen better days. I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine the moment I stepped inside. From the beginning, there was something strange about the place, a weird vibe that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was like the air was heavy with the memories of the past, and the house itself was watching our every move. At first, it was the little things that unsettled me, props that seemed to move on their own, lights flickering without explanation, and strange, unexplained noises that sent shivers down your spine. I brushed it off, thinking it was just nerves from being on a horror movie set. The crew was tight-knit, but even they couldn't deny that there was something off about the mansion. Whispers about strange occurrences became a constant background hum, and I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. One evening, I was assigned the task of locking up the set after a long day of shooting. The crew had already left, and I was alone in that eerie old mansion. The silence was oppressive, and I could hear the faint rustling of the wind outside. As I locked the front door, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a soft, mournful wail, like a distant cry of agony. The sound seemed to come from deep within the house. I was terrified, but curiosity got the best of me, and I had to find out where it was coming from. I ventured further into the mansion, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The wail grew louder, more desperate, and it led me to a locked door in the basement. It was old and heavy, but I managed to pry it open. What I saw in that dimly lit basement will haunt me forever. There, in the corner, was a ghostly figure, a woman in a tattered dress, her eyes filled with sorrow and torment. She whispered something, her voice a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled back in terror, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew then that the mansion was truly haunted, and the ghostly woman was proof of the curse that had plagued the production. I tried to tell the crew, but they dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences on set only escalated. The prop department would set up a scene, only to come back and find everything rearranged. Lights would flicker on and off, and eerie voices could be heard when no one else was around. As we continued to film, things took a terrifying turn. One night, as we were shooting a pivotal scene, the ghostly woman I had seen in the basement appeared on set. She stood there, her eyes filled with anguish, and her presence sent a wave of dread through the cast and crew. The director, a no-nonsense type, ordered the cameras to keep rolling and the actors to play along, convinced it was a prank. But as the scene unfolded, the ghostly woman's whispers grew louder and more desperate. It was as if she was trying to communicate something that had been buried for centuries. And then, the unimaginable happened. In the final moments of the scene, the ghostly woman reached out and touched one of the actors. He let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Chaos erupted on set as the crew rushed to his aid, but it was clear that something had gone terribly wrong. The actor was rushed to the hospital, and the crew couldn't explain what had happened. The director decided to shut down production until they could figure out what went wrong. But here's where it gets even stranger. As we began to investigate, we uncovered old records that revealed a dark secret. The mansion had a history of tragedy and death, including a fire that had claimed the lives of the previous occupants. It turned out that the crew wasn't alone on that set. The spirits of those who had died in the mansion were still lingering, and they weren't too happy about our intrusion. The ghostly woman was just one of many who had met a tragic end in that house. The truth was finally sinking in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the curse of the mansion had claimed its first victim on our film. It was a chilling realization, and we couldn't continue to film knowing the dangers that lurked in the shadows. We decided to leave the mansion behind, but it wasn't done with us. The spirits had become a part of our crew, and they weren't about to let us go so easily. Months later, after we had abandoned the film, the crew members who had worked on that cursed set began to disappear one by one. It was as if the spirits had exacted their revenge, taking those who had invaded their home. I was the last one left, haunted by the memories of that fateful night. The mansion called to me, its cursed walls whispering my name. I couldn't escape the feeling that the ghostly woman was watching, waiting for me to return. And return I did. One moonless night, I found myself drawn back to the mansion, unable to resist its siren call. As I stepped through the rotting door, I realized that I had become a part of the curse that had haunted that movie set. The crew members I had once worked alongside were now revealed as ghostly apparitions, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. They reached out to me, their eyes filled with sorrow and regret. I was now one of them, a part of the haunted movie set, destined to relive the horrors of that fateful production for all eternity. So, my friend, the next time you watch a horror movie, remember that the line between fiction and reality can be thin. Sometimes, the horror is not just on the screen. It can become a part of your life, lurking in the shadows and waiting to claim those who dare to enter its domain. Picture this. I found myself working as a production assistant on a movie set for a horror film. It was an old, slightly dilapidated mansion that had been chosen as the ideal backdrop for our spine-chilling masterpiece. The set looked convincingly haunted with its creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and antique furniture. The eerie atmosphere wasn't just a facade, it genuinely had an unsettling vibe. Maybe it was the way the shadows danced on the walls, or the echo of your footsteps that lingered in the air long after you'd taken a step. But that's what you'd expect on a haunted movie set, right? It's all part of the show, or so I thought. At first, it was the little things that gave me the heebie-jeebies. Props that mysteriously moved from their designated spots, strange sounds in the middle of the night, and lights flickering on and off at the most inopportune moments. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and horror movie ambience. But as the days went by, I couldn't deny that something strange was going on. It was like the set itself was alive, with a dark and mischievous personality. The crew would hush when you entered a room, and I could swear I heard whispers when no one else was around. One evening, I had the dubious honor of locking up the set. The rest of the crew had already left, and I was alone in the eerie mansion. The silence was oppressive, and every sound seemed amplified in that stillness. As I locked the front door and began making my way to the exit, I heard a soft, ghostly sobbing. It sent a shiver down my spine and raised the hairs on the back of my neck. The crying seemed to be coming from somewhere within the house. My gut told me to leave, but my curiosity got the best of me. I ventured deeper into the mansion, following the sound. The sobbing grew louder, more heart-wrenching, and led me to a locked door in the basement. The door was old and heavy, but I managed to force it open. And there, in the dimly lit basement, I saw her, a woman, ghostly pale and draped in a tattered white dress. Her tearful eyes met mine, and the sobbing seemed to turn into words, though I couldn't quite make them out. I was paralyzed, unable to move, and her presence filled the air with a heavy sadness. I stumbled back, retreating from the basement, heart pounding in my chest. I had seen a ghost. There was no doubt about it. But when I tried to tell the director and crew about it, they brushed it off as my imagination running wild. No one wanted to believe we were working on an actual haunted set, even though the signs were undeniable. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences on set continued to escalate. Objects moved, lights flickered, and eerie voices were heard. The crew grew more on edge, and it was clear that our unsettling surroundings were taking their toll. One night, as we filmed the pivotal scene, the ghostly woman I'd seen in the basement appeared on set. The director, thinking it was a prank, ordered the cameras to keep rolling and the actors to play along. It was a bizarre and terrifying experience, as the actors' reactions turned from scripted horror to genuine fear. As the scene reached its climax, the ghostly woman's presence became more intense. It was as though she was trying to communicate something, to tell her story, and it sent chills down my spine. The crew watched in horrified fascination, unable to look away. But here's where the story takes a twist. As the scene concluded, the ghostly woman reached out and touched one of the actors. He let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Chaos erupted on set as the crew rushed to decide, and we realized this was no ordinary haunting. The actor was rushed to the hospital, and it was clear that something inexplicable had occurred. The director decided to shut down production, not knowing if what we'd captured on film was a curse or something far worse. In the weeks that followed, we delved into the history of the mansion. What we discovered was that it had a dark and tragic past, but not because of ghosts. The house had been built on unstable ground, and its foundation was slowly sinking into the swampy land. It turned out that the strange occurrences on set were due to the mansion's deteriorating structural integrity. The creaking floors, shifting walls, and odd sounds were all the result of the house's own slow collapse. The actor who had been injured had nearly tripped over a loose floorboard, but the fear and superstition had magnified it into something more sinister. The director and crew felt a collective sense of relief, knowing that we had been working in a physically unsafe environment rather than a haunted one. With the truth finally uncovered, the set was deemed unsafe for production and the movie was shelved. It was a bittersweet ending, but at least we could move on from our haunted set with a sigh of relief. So, my friend, when it comes to ghostly tales and horror movie sets, sometimes the truth can be even stranger than fiction. We may have thought we were dealing with restless spirits, but in the end, it was the very ground beneath our feet that held the most frightening secrets. You know, they say that time travel is the stuff of science fiction, a fanciful dream of hopping in a machine and visiting the past or the future. But what if I told you that I stumbled into time travel accidentally, and it was anything but a dream? It was a haunting nightmare that left me shaken to my core. It all began one unassuming evening when I was exploring an old abandoned building in the heart of the city. I was a bit of an urban explorer, and this place had always piqued my curiosity. The structure was a crumbling relic with shattered windows and graffiti-covered walls. It had seen better days, but that's what drew me to it. Inside, the building was a maze of forgotten hallways and decrepit rooms. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and I could hear the soft scurry of rats as they darted into the shadows. It was like stepping into a time capsule, a place that had been frozen in time. As I ventured deeper, I came across a room unlike the others. It was small and dimly lit, with faded wallpaper peeling from the walls. In the center of the room, an old ornate mirror stood, seemingly untouched by time. It was the kind of mirror you'd find in a Victorian-era mansion, the glass slightly warped and tinged with age. I couldn't resist the urge to inspect it closer. As I gazed into the mirror, I saw my own reflection, but something was different. The room behind me wasn't the abandoned building I had been exploring. Instead, it was an elegantly furnished parlor from a bygone era, complete with a crystal chandelier and antique furniture. My heart raced as I looked around, trying to make sense of the impossible. I touched the mirror's cool surface, and the room in the reflection shifted and swirled, as though it were beckoning me to step through. It was like something out of a fairy tale, a passage to another time. I couldn't resist the allure of the mirror, and before I knew it, I had stepped through. The sensation was like being caught in a whirlwind, my surroundings spinning and distorting until I found myself in that elegant parlor, transported to the past. The room was bustling with life, and I couldn't help but gape in wonder. People in intricate old-fashioned attire moved gracefully about, engaged in lively conversations. It was as if I had stepped into the pages of a history book, and I was the out-of-place intruder. As I explored the sprawling mansion, I realized that I had been transported to the early 1900s, a time of opulence and grandeur. The mansion was in its prime, and I couldn't help but be captivated by the beauty of a bygone era. But my wonder quickly turned to dread as I realized that I was not merely an observer. The people in the mansion could see me, and they regarded me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Panic welled up inside me as I tried to explain that I didn't belong there, that I was from the future. They laughed it off, thinking I was playing a peculiar joke. They were convinced that I was a guest who had taken the theme of the party a bit too seriously. My protests fell on deaf ears, and I was trapped in a time that was not my own. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to adapt to my new life in the past. I took on the role of a guest in the mansion, living in a gilded cage of luxury and excess. But no matter how I tried to fit in, I couldn't shake the feeling of being a foreigner in a strange land. I missed the world I had left behind, the familiar sights and sounds of my own time. I longed for the people I loved, for the life I had known. But the mirror was nowhere to be found, and I was trapped in the past, a prisoner of my accidental time travel. And here's the twist, my friend. Just when I had resigned myself to my fate, I found the mirror once again. It had been hidden away in a dusty, forgotten corner of the mansion, its glass tarnished with age. As I gazed into the mirror, I realized that it held the power to transport me back to my own time. The room behind me, the one from the past, was now reflected in the glass. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the journey ahead, and stepped through the mirror. The sensation was like being caught in a whirlwind once again, and I felt myself hurtling through time and space. When I emerged on the other side, I was back in the abandoned building, the mirror standing before me. I was overcome with relief, but the mirror's glass was cracked and shattered. It had brought me back, but at a great cost. The journey had taken a toll on the mirror, rendering it useless for any future adventures. I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss as I stood there, staring at the broken mirror. I had experienced the thrill and terror of accidental time travel, and now it was nothing more than a shattered relic of the past. As I made my way out of the abandoned building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed something extraordinary, something that defied the boundaries of time and space. My accidental time travel had been a surreal and haunting experience, one that would stay with me for the rest of my days. So, my friend, the next time you find yourself exploring the unknown, keep an eye out for the unexpected. You never know when you might stumble upon a portal to another time, a world of wonder and terror that defies explanation. Just be careful what you wish for, because sometimes the past can be a haunting place. You won't believe what happened to me. and I wouldn't blame you if you thought I was making it all up. But I swear, every word of this is true. It all began on a rainy Tuesday evening when I was stuck in my apartment, bored out of my mind. I was fiddling around with a peculiar old pocket watch I'd found at a flea market earlier that day. As I fiddled with the watch, I noticed it had a tiny button hidden on its side. Of course, curiosity got the best of me, and I pressed it. Suddenly, the world around me started to blur, as though I was tumbling into a vortex of swirling colors and strange sensations. My apartment seemed to warp and twist, and I felt myself being pulled through time itself. The world around me blurred into a whirlwind of motion and color. It was as though I was hurtling through a tunnel of time and space. When the chaos finally subsided, I found myself in a place that I can only describe as a dystopian nightmare. The sky was a sickly shade of yellow, and the air was thick with an acrid, metallic smell. Buildings that had once been sleek and modern now lay in ruins, their glass windows shattered and their steel frames twisted and blackened. The city, if you could still call it that, was a desolate wasteland. There were no signs of life, no sounds of cars or people bustling about. It was as though the world had been emptied and left to decay. I was overwhelmed by a sense of dread, a feeling that I was utterly and hopelessly alone in a world that had been torn apart by some unimaginable catastrophe. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind, and I felt a rising tide of fear. My first thought was to return to my own time, to undo whatever had just happened. I fumbled with the pocket watch, trying to reverse the process that had brought me here, but no matter how I pressed the buttons and twisted the dials, nothing happened. The watch remained stubbornly unresponsive. I was stranded in this desolate future, and there was no way back. The realization was like a punch to the gut, leaving me gasping for breath and overwhelmed by despair. The world I had known was gone, replaced by this nightmarish landscape of ruin and decay. As I explored the city, I couldn't help but wonder what had caused this apocalyptic future. Had it been war, disease, or some other catastrophe? The buildings that once stood as symbols of progress and civilization were now nothing more than hollow shells, and the streets were littered with the remnants of a forgotten world. I walked through the empty streets, feeling like the last person on earth. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there, just the empty ruins of the city. The days turned into weeks, and I struggled to survive in this desolate future. I scavenged for food and clean water, doing my best to avoid the dangers that lurked in the ruins. But it was a grim and lonely existence, one that wore away at my sanity. And then, one day, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. It was a group of figures, moving in the distance. They were human, or at least they looked like it, but they were different, altered in some unsettling way. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, and their movements were jerky and unnatural. I ducked behind a crumbling wall, my heart pounding in my chest. Figures passed by, and I could hear them muttering in a strange, guttural language. They seemed to be scavenging for something, their attention focused on the ruins around them. As they moved away, I dared to breathe again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something far more sinister than a group of survivors. There was something otherworldly about those figures, something that made my skin crawl. I had to find out more, to understand what had happened to the world and who these figures were. I began to shadow them, keeping my distance as I followed their movements through the ruined city. It was a dangerous game, and I knew I was risking my life, but I had to know the truth. And here's the twist, my friend. It turns out that those figures were not human, at least not anymore. They were part of a malevolent force that had taken over this dystopian future, a force that had twisted and corrupted the very fabric of reality. As I watched from the shadows, I saw them performing dark rituals, channeling strange energies, and communing with entities that were far from human. It was as though they were the architects of this apocalyptic nightmare, the ones responsible for the devastation that had befallen the world. I realized that I was not just a witness to this nightmarish future. I was a threat to those who had created it. They could not allow me to uncover their secrets, and they would stop at nothing to eliminate me. So, I did the only thing I could do. I used the pocket watch to return to my own time, to the world I had known. But the experience had changed me, left me haunted by the knowledge of the horrors that lurked in the future. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had glimpsed a reality that was still out there, waiting to be unleashed. The world I had seen was a warning, a dark omen of what could come to pass if we are not careful with the power we hold in our hands. And so, my friend, the next time you stumble upon something unusual, something that seems too good to be true, be cautious. The line between curiosity and catastrophe can be thinner than you think, and the consequences can be more terrifying than you could ever imagine. I never believed in time travel. It was the stuff of science fiction, the dream of mad scientists and writers with wild imaginations. That was until I stumbled upon it accidentally, and my life took a terrifying turn I could never have imagined. It was just an ordinary day. I was fiddling with an old wristwatch that I'd found in my grandfather's attic. It was a vintage timepiece, the kind you wind up, with an ornate face and hands that had seen better days. I was drawn to it, fascinated by the way it ticked on, keeping time as it had for generations. As I moved it, I noticed something unusual. The second hand started moving backward, defying the laws of nature and my understanding of how watches worked. I figured it must be broken, so I kept winding it, and that's when everything changed. The world around me began to blur and twist, as if reality itself was unraveling. I was engulfed in a vortex of swirling colors and strange sensations, and it was like I was tumbling through a time warp. Before I knew it, I landed with a thud in a place that was both familiar and utterly foreign. The room I found myself in was a replica of my own, but it was somehow darker, colder, and filled with a sense of impending doom. As I looked around, I realized that everything was slightly off, like a distorted reflection in a funhouse mirror. I checked my wrist, and the vintage watch was gone. Panic set in as I realized that I had been transported to another time, or perhaps another dimension. I felt like a trespasser in my own life, and the feeling was suffocating. As I stepped outside, I couldn't ignore the strangeness of the world around me. The buildings were dilapidated and twisted, like something out of a nightmare. The sky was overcast, with a sickly greenish hue that sent shivers down my spine. It was as though I had stepped into a dystopian version of my own reality. I walked down the street, but there were no people, no signs of life. The world was eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant, mournful howl of the wind. I felt utterly alone and lost, trapped in a nightmare that had no exit. The days turned into weeks as I roamed this dark and twisted version of my world. I couldn't comprehend how I had ended up here, and I was plagued by the fear that I might never find my way back. It was like a waking nightmare, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something malevolent was lurking in the shadows. And then came the twist. One fateful day, as I wandered the desolate streets, I came face to face with someone who looked exactly like me. It was like looking in a mirror, but the reflection was warped and twisted. This doppelganger of mine had a malevolent glint in his eyes, a sinister smile that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My clone, or whatever he was, seemed to revel in my fear and confusion. He taunted me, mimicking my movements with an eerie precision. It was as though he knew my every thought, my every fear. As I tried to escape from this evil version of myself, I couldn't help but wonder how he had come to exist. Was he the result of some catastrophic event, a manifestation of my darkest fears and anxieties? Or had he been created by the strange power of the vintage watch? My doppelganger stalked me relentlessly, and I realized that I was in a battle for my very existence. He seemed to revel in tormenting me, pushing me to the brink of madness with his malevolent taunts. But here's the real twist, my friend. Just when I thought I was defeated, I found a way to use the vintage watch to transport myself back to my own time. I didn't understand how it worked, but I didn't care. I had to escape from this nightmarish alternate reality, and the watch was my only hope. As I activated the watch and felt reality shift around me once again, I was filled with a sense of relief. But when I emerged on the other side, I realized that I had returned to a world that was even more twisted and horrifying. It was as though the evil clone had followed me, or perhaps he had been waiting for me on the other side. The world I had known was now a nightmarish hellscape, and I was trapped with the malevolent version of myself. The battle between us intensified, a surreal and terrifying struggle for control. I realized that I had to confront my own fears and darkness to overcome the sinister reflection of myself that haunted this twisted reality. As I fought for my survival, I couldn't shake the feeling that this alternate version of me was a manifestation of my own inner demons, a twisted reflection of the darkest corners of my mind. I had to confront my own fears and anxieties to defeat the malevolent force that had taken hold of this world. And in the end, it was a battle not just for my life, but for my very soul. I had to face the darkest aspects of myself and emerge from the twisted reality intact. So, my friend, the next time you stumble upon something strange and unusual, be careful what you wish for. Reality can be a fragile thing, and the line between what is real and what is imagined can be thinner than you think. Be wary of your own reflections, for sometimes the greatest horrors are the ones that lie within. You ever hear the saying, hunting's a way to embrace nature, connect with your primal instincts? Well, let me tell you about the time I went hunting, and the only thing I connected with was sheer terror. It was a crisp autumn morning when my buddies Mike and Jake and I decided to head into the woods for a day of hunting. We were experienced hunters, or so we thought, and this trip was supposed to be like any other. But you know what they say about the best laid plans. We had set out before the sun came up, and as we trudged through the forest, the only sounds were the rustling leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. The air was chilly, and the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth filled our nostrils. Our goal for the day was to bag some deer. We had all our gear, rifles, camouflage, backpacks filled with supplies, and a steely determination to make the trip worthwhile. We knew this forest like the back of our hands, or so we thought. We split up to cover more ground, a rookie mistake in hindsight. Mike went to the east, Jake took the west, and I headed south. We were each radio equipped to stay in touch, but with the dense woods and rocky terrain, the signal wasn't always reliable. As I stalked through the underbrush, I couldn't help but marvel at the serenity of the forest. The trees reached for the sky, their leaves an explosion of vibrant reds and yellows. It was hard not to feel like a part of something bigger, to feel at one with nature. But that feeling was short-lived. Hours passed, and despite my best efforts, I hadn't spotted any deer. I cursed my bad luck and decided to radio Mike and Jake to regroup. That's when things took a bizarre turn. I couldn't get a signal on my radio, no matter how much I tried. I figured it was just bad luck and decided to backtrack to find the guys. That's when I heard it. A faint, eerie chanting, almost like a haunting whisper on the wind. It sent shivers down my spine, and I strained to pinpoint the source. There, not far from me, was a small clearing. I approached cautiously and peered through the thick underbrush to see a group of people dressed in tattered rags, standing in a circle and chanting in an unfamiliar language. My blood ran cold. What on earth was this? I watched in shock as they seemed to be in some sort of trance, swaying back and forth. Their faces were obscured by the hooded robes they wore, and I couldn't make out their features. It was a sight right out of a horror movie, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. Suddenly, they stopped chanting and turned their heads towards me in unison. I froze, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I thought they hadn't seen me, but then one of them pointed in my direction. Panic set in, and I turned and ran as fast as my legs would carry me. The woods seemed to close in around me, and the echoing footfalls of the cult members followed me through the trees. I glanced back over my shoulder, and to my horror, they were gaining on me. My heart raced, and I pushed myself to run even faster, the sound of their footsteps growing louder. Just when it felt like I couldn't run any longer, I burst into a small clearing. In the center was a large ancient oak tree, its branches twisted and gnarled. It was like something out of a nightmare. I took shelter behind the tree, trying to catch my breath and slow my racing heart, but the cult members had me surrounded, their eerie chanting growing louder as they closed in. I was trapped, and there was nowhere to run. I felt a sense of hopelessness, like a trapped animal about to meet its fate. Then, just as they were about to reach me, something extraordinary happened. A gust of wind swirled around the clearing, and the leaves on the ground began to dance in a frenzy. The cult members were knocked off their feet, tumbling backward, their hoods flying off to reveal their faces twisted in surprise. And here's the twist, my friend. Just when I thought I was a goner, the cult members weren't what I had expected. They were just regular people, as scared and confused as I was. They had been lured into the woods by someone or something, just like me. The wind continued to howl, and I felt myself being lifted off the ground, as though I were caught in the grip of some supernatural force. The cult members and I were tossed about like leaves in a storm, our terrified screams lost in the wind. When I finally landed, I was back in the forest alone. The cult members were nowhere to be seen. I stumbled through the woods, disoriented and shaken, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination, a figment of my imagination? When I finally found my way back to the cabin, I was a wreck. Mike and Jake were already there, having had their own unsettling encounters. We decided to pack up and leave, not wanting to spend another second in those woods. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and malevolent lurked in those trees. Maybe it was just a bunch of lost souls, or maybe it was something far more sinister. All I knew was that I would never venture into those woods again. So, my friend, the next time you head into the great outdoors, be prepared for the unexpected. Nature is a powerful force, and sometimes the line between reality and the supernatural can blur in the most unsettling ways. And if you ever hear that haunting whisper on the wind, do yourself a favor and run as fast as you can. Hunting has always been a thrill for me, a way to unwind, escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and bask in the beauty of the great outdoors. But there was one hunting trip that I'll never forget, one that went horribly wrong and left me questioning my beliefs about the natural world. It was early autumn, and the leaves had started to turn fiery shades of red and gold. The air was crisp, and I was eager to hit the woods. Armed with my trusty rifle and a backpack filled with supplies, I set out into the wilderness, ready to track down some game. I'd been hearing stories about strange occurrences in these woods, sightings of bizarre creatures, unexplained sounds, and eerie tales from the locals. Some said it was just campfire folklore, but my curiosity got the better of me. I was heading deeper into the forest when I came across a set of tracks that I couldn't identify. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before, strange clawed imprints with 3 toes, all leading in the same direction. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, but I couldn't resist following them. As I continued, the woods grew silent, and a heavy, oppressive feeling settled over me. The air seemed charged with an otherworldly energy, like the calm before a storm. I moved cautiously, with my finger resting lightly on the trigger of my rifle. That's when I saw it, a creature like none I'd ever imagined. It had leathery, translucent skin and jagged spines running down its back. Its eyes were a sickly, luminescent yellow, and its teeth were long, sharp, and gleaming. It moved silently, with an unnerving grace, and its gaze locked onto me. Fear clenched my chest, and I barely had time to react before I fired a shot at it. The shot hit home, and the creature let out an otherworldly shrill scream. But instead of collapsing, it seemed to shimmer, as if it were made of pure energy, and then it vanished into thin air. I couldn't believe my eyes. What had I just encountered? My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had happened. The creature had been real, but it had also been something more, something I couldn't begin to comprehend. I knew I had to get out of there, but my curiosity and fear kept me rooted to the spot. Hours passed, and I didn't see any sign of the creature. I was about to call it a day and head back when it appeared again, this time in a shimmering, ghostly form. It had brought along some friends, and they were circling me, their eerie eyes locked onto mine. I raised my rifle and fired a few shots, but they passed right through the creatures as if they were nothing more than apparitions. Panic set in as I realized I was completely defenseless. There was no escape. Just when it felt like I was done for, a deafening roar pierced the air, and a massive, hulking creature emerged from the shadows. It was like a guardian from a nightmare, with dark, mottled skin and rows of razor-sharp teeth. It lunged at the ghostly creatures, tearing through them as if they were made of smoke. The battle was fierce and otherworldly, a clash between the living and the spectral. The guardian creature fought with a ferocity I'd never seen, and it was clear that it had come to my aid. It wasn't long before the ghostly creatures were vanquished, disappearing in puffs of smoke. The guardian creature turned its attention to me, its massive form casting a shadow over me. I thought I was next on the menu, but to my surprise, it just stared at me with those eerie eyes, as if it were trying to communicate something. And here's the twist, my friend. Just when I thought I'd faced my worst nightmare, the guardian creature didn't harm me. Instead, it turned and vanished into the woods, leaving me shaken and bewildered. I eventually made my way back to civilization, with a story no one would believe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something inexplicable, something beyond the realm of the natural world. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about the creatures I'd encountered and the guardian that had saved me. What were they? Where had they come from? I realized that the world was far more mysterious and complex than I had ever imagined. My life had been forever changed by that hunting trip, and I couldn't help but wonder if there were other creatures lurking in the shadows, just beyond the reach of our understanding. I was left with more questions than answers, and a profound sense that there were things in this world that defied explanation. So, my friend, the next time you venture into the wilderness, keep your senses sharp and your wits about you. You never know what you might encounter in the deep, dark woods, and sometimes the truth can be far more terrifying than fiction. Picture this, a crisp, cool morning, the kind where the sun paints the world with soft, golden hues. I was out in the wilderness with my hunting buddies, Mark and Dave, all of us seasoned hunters who thought we knew the woods like the back of our hands. But as the saying goes, arrogance can lead to disaster, and this hunting trip proved that in spades. We had set out with the usual enthusiasm, all geared up and determined to back some game. The forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant birdsong, and the air was scented with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves and damp moss. Our rifles, camouflage gear, and packed lunches were ready, and we had every intention of making this a successful expedition. We believed that we were the apex predators, the kings of this wilderness, but boy, Were we in for a rude awakening? As we ventured deeper into the woods, Mark decided to scout ahead to find signs of deer, while Dave and I stuck together. We were equipped with walkie-talkies to keep in touch, but the dense canopy often messed with our signals. The quiet of the woods was occasionally punctuated by the snap of a twig or the distant chirp of a bird, and all was serene. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel that something was off, as if the forest were holding its breath, watching, waiting. We walked for hours, scanning the surroundings for any signs of our prey, but there was nothing. My internal alarm bells began to chime faintly. A sense of unease crept over me. Still, I brushed it aside as paranoia. Then, as we ventured deeper into the woods, I heard it, a faint, distant whisper. The voices were barely audible, like the softest rustle of leaves in the breeze. They tugged at the corners of my mind and filled me with dread. "Did you hear that?" I asked Dave, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" he replied, clearly puzzled. I waved it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. What else could it be? There was no one out here, no human presence but us. Dave and I trudged on, but the voices grew louder and more insistent, as if they were whispering directly into my ear. They weren't words, but rather eerie guttural sounds, as if the forest itself was trying to communicate with me. My unease grew into fear, but Dave seemed oblivious, pressing on, as if nothing were amiss. I considered radioing Mark to let him know about the strange occurrences, but even the walkie-talkie remained silent. The voices seemed to be leading me deeper into the forest, away from Dave, away from any semblance of safety. I couldn't help but follow, my legs moving of their own accord, like I was no longer in control. That's when I saw her, a woman, dressed in tattered, dirty clothes, her hair matted with leaves and dirt. Her eyes were hollow and vacant, and her face contorted into an eerie grin that made my skin crawl. I couldn't tear my gaze away from her, and I took a few hesitant steps toward her. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, the words escaping my lips almost involuntarily. No response, just that unsettling grin that seemed to stretch impossibly wide. My heart pounded in my chest as I continued to approach her, powerless to stop myself. Just when I was within arm's reach, the forest around us erupted in a cacophony of cackles and whispers. I tried to back away, to flee from this nightmarish apparition. It was as if my limbs were encased in lead. The woman's hands shot out and grabbed my face, her grip like iron. Her laughter was shrill and unhinged as she leaned in close, her breath foul with decay. Panic surged through me, and I struggled to break free. But it was too late. With a cruel smile, she spoke in a language I couldn't understand. And then, as if following her command, I raised my rifle to my head. The world blurred around me, and all I could hear was her laughter, echoing in the recesses of my mind. And here's the twist, my friend. Just when I thought I was about to pull the trigger, I was jolted from this nightmarish trance by the sound of a gunshot. Dave had returned, and he'd fired a shot into the air, snapping me out of the woman's control. I dropped the rifle and stumbled back, gasping for air, my heart racing as I realized what had nearly transpired. Dave rushed to my side, concerned and bewildered, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the madness I'd just experienced. How could I possibly put it into words? We retreated from the woods that day, shaken and scared by the encounter. As we left, I looked back one last time, half expecting to see the woman still there, but the forest was empty. The whispers had ceased, and the eerie presence had lifted, but I couldn't forget the woman's eyes or the feeling of being utterly controlled. It was a chilling reminder of the dark, unknown forces that can lurk in the most familiar of places. And so, my friend, remember this: even in the most tranquil and familiar settings, there may be something inexplicable and horrifying lurking in the shadows. You may think you're the one in control, but sometimes the true hunter becomes the hunted. You ever have one of those nights when everything seems to go wrong? Well, this is the story of a night drive that went so far south, it ventured into the realm of the bizarre and terrifying. It all started with a casual plan. A buddy of mine, Tom, had invited me to check out an old roadside diner on the outskirts of town. The place had a reputation for killer milkshakes and greasy burgers, so I couldn't resist the temptation. As we cruised down the dark, winding road that led to the diner, the distant hum of the city faded into the background, and the night was as still as a graveyard. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows that danced across the road like specters. It was the kind of night where your imagination could run wild. Tom was in the driver's seat, steering the car with a grin, and I was in the passenger seat, navigating with a smartphone's GPS. The dull glow of the screen illuminated my face, and I was so engrossed in the directions that I didn't notice when the road took an unexpected turn. The GPS led us down a narrow, dimly lit alleyway, the kind of place you wouldn't want to get stuck in after dark. It was strange, and I didn't remember the diner being in an area like this. My unease grew, but I figured I'd made a wrong turn somewhere and would correct it soon enough. The alley twisted and turned, and the darkness grew more oppressive. There were no streetlights, and the only sounds were the low hum of the car's engine and the soft patter of rain on the windshield. It was as if the city had abandoned this place, left it to the ghosts and the shadows. As we continued down this eerie path, I couldn't help but feel like we were headed into the heart of something strange, something that didn't belong in the city I knew. I glanced at Tom, who was now frowning at the unfamiliar surroundings. It was clear we were lost, but we couldn't figure out how to get back to familiar territory. Just when I was about to suggest we turn around, something bizarre happened. The alleyway opened up into a small square, and there, under the flickering light of a solitary lamppost, stood a group of strange hooded figures. I blinked in disbelief, thinking it was some kind of bizarre performance art or occult gathering. But there was an eerie energy in the air, a tension that sent a shiver down my spine. Tom slowed the car to a crawl, and we exchanged uneasy glances. The figures were unmoving, their faces obscured by hooded robes, and they seemed to be whispering in unison, their voices a haunting guttural chant. We couldn't make out what they were saying, but the atmosphere was charged with an unsettling aura. It was as if they were calling to us, pulling us into their strange ritual. Tom was about to hit the gas and speed out of there when something even more bizarre happened. From the shadows emerged a group of creatures unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were twisted, grotesque figures with elongated limbs and gnarled, inhuman faces. Their eyes gleamed with an eerie, predatory light, and their mouths gaped open, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Tom slammed his foot on the gas, but it was as if an invisible force held the car in place. The creatures closed in, their fingers brushing the car's windows, and I could see their leathery, gnarled skin. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror, wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank or if I'd stumbled into a different dimension altogether. Tom was frantically trying to break free, but the car wouldn't budge. And here's the twist, my friend. Just when it seemed like all was lost, a blinding light pierced the darkness, and a massive, thunderous roar filled the air. It was as if a storm had materialized out of thin air, and the creatures let out agonized screams as they were lifted off the ground. The car lurched forward, and we sped away from that nightmarish square, leaving the hooded figures and their grotesque minions writhing in the storm's fury. As we drove back into familiar territory, we were left shaken and bewildered by the bizarre encounter. The GPS seemed to work fine again, leading us to the diner without any further hitches. We ate in silence, and neither of us could shake off the feeling that we'd witnessed something beyond our comprehension. It was like the city had a hidden underbelly, a place where reality and nightmares intertwined. The milkshakes and burgers tasted like cardboard, and I couldn't help but wonder if the bizarre encounter was a warning. Maybe some things are better left undiscovered, better left in the realm of the unknown. So, my friend, the next time you head out for a night drive, be cautious of where the road might lead you. Sometimes, the city has secrets that are best left in the dark. And if you ever encounter hooded figures and twisted creatures, well, I hope you have a guardian storm on your side to see you through. You know, some of the scariest moments in life come when you least expect them. Take this one night, for instance. It was just a casual drive with my friend Sarah, but it quickly turned into a heart-pounding nightmare that still haunts me to this day. It all started with a simple plan. We were going to visit a friend's cabin up in the mountains. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the landscape, and the sky was a stunning tapestry of oranges and purples. We were excited, laughing and chatting as we headed into the hills. Now, I've always been a city person. The open road at night, miles away from the nearest house or streetlight, unnerves me a bit. But I trusted Sarah, and I was looking forward to a peaceful weekend getaway. As we drove deeper into the mountains, the air grew chillier, and the surroundings darker. The twists and turns of the road were enough to make you queasy, but the sense of adventure kept me going. Sarah was at the wheel, navigating the winding road with skill. I was in the passenger seat, fiddling with the radio to find some tunes to keep us entertained. But as we drove higher into the hills, the radio signal began to waver. It was the first sign that this night drive was going wrong. The road narrowed, and we were surrounded by dense forest on either side. The moon was shrouded by heavy clouds, casting a gloomy, foreboding darkness. The tall, swaying trees seemed to loom overhead like sentinels of the night. Then, just as I was about to give up on the radio, it crackled to life with a burst of eerie, distorted music. It sent shivers down my spine, and I quickly turned it off, my heart pounding. Sarah looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Must be some interference," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. But I could see the unease in her eyes. The remote location was clearly affecting the radio signals, and I was starting to feel a growing sense of isolation. As we continued our ascent, we noticed a thick, soupy fog rolling in. It crept over the road, reducing visibility to a mere few feet. Sarah slowed down, gripping the wheel tightly, and I could see the tension in her knuckles. I remember thinking that this was like a scene from a horror movie. The isolated road, the radio interference, and now the dense, ominous fog. My imagination was starting to get the better of me, and I had to remind myself that this was just a foggy mountain drive. That's when I saw it, a figure on the road ahead. A person, or so it seemed, standing in the middle of the fog-shrouded highway. I gasped and grabbed Sarah's arm, my voice trembling as I urged her to stop. She slammed on the brakes just in time. As the fog began to clear, we could see the figure more clearly. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and her hair wild. She was staring at us, her eyes filled with an eerie, unnatural glow. My heart raced and a chill ran down my spine. Should we check if she needs help? I whispered to Sarah, my voice quivering. But Sarah, her face pale, shook her head and slowly began to drive around the woman, who never once moved. As we passed her, I glanced out the window, and she was still there, her hollow eyes locked onto me. The fog eventually lifted, and the night drive continued without further incident. We arrived at the cabin, shaken but determined to enjoy our weekend getaway. We laughed off the encounter with the woman, convincing ourselves it was just a bizarre coincidence. As the weekend went on, we hiked, shared stories, and enjoyed the serene beauty of the mountains. It was a perfect escape from our daily lives, and I felt more at ease with every passing hour. But that night, as we prepared to head back home, things took a terrifying turn. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows, and the dense forest seemed to close in around us. The air grew heavy with silence, and the unease I'd felt earlier returned. We got into the car, and Sarah took the wheel once again. As we descended the mountain, the fog returned, thick and swirling. My nerves were on edge, and I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. That's when I saw her again, the same woman from the mountain road. She was standing in the middle of the fog-covered highway, her eyes still glowing with that eerie light. I gasped, and Sarah slammed on the brakes. But here's the twist, my friend. As the woman drew closer, her appearance began to change. She transformed into something unimaginable, a monstrous, nightmarish creature with long, gnarled limbs and jagged teeth. Fear gripped me, and I couldn't move. The creature reached into the car, its icy fingers closing around my arm, and I felt a pain like nothing I'd ever experienced. It was as if my very soul was being drained away. Sarah, too, was paralyzed with terror as the creature's eyes bore into her. And then, in a nightmarish, bone-chilling whisper, it spoke. "Welcome to the night drive, where the living meet the lost." And with that, it pulled me out of the car, and I watched in helpless horror as the vehicle sped off into the darkness, leaving me alone with the creature. The pain in my arm intensified, and I felt my mind slipping away. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, caught between reality and the supernatural. As the creature began to drag me into the dense fog, I could hear Sarah's distant screams fading into the night. Picture this. It was a moonless night, and I was driving down a deserted highway, the occasional flicker of my car's headlights revealing nothing but an endless expanse of darkness. The only company I had was the soft hum of the engine and the muffled sound of a late-night radio show. I was lost in my thoughts, contemplating the myriad twists and turns of life. The air outside was crisp and cool, the kind that seeps into your bones, but I was cozy in my car. The world was quiet and seemingly undisturbed, but I had a feeling that was about to change. I had been driving for hours, the solitude of the empty road both comforting and eerie. My thoughts kept returning to an important decision I needed to make, one that could shape the course of my future. As the miles passed beneath my wheels, I became increasingly unsure of what to do. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, his silhouette faintly illuminated by the car's headlights. I approached cautiously, wondering what could possibly compel someone to be out here at this hour. As I drew nearer, I could see that the man was dressed in tattered clothes, and his face was hidden beneath a hood that obscured his features. A sudden feeling of unease washed over me, and I hesitated before pulling over to offer him a ride. The stranger didn't speak. He simply opened the car door and climbed in. His presence was unsettling, and my heart raced as I wondered if I'd made a grave mistake. I asked him where he was headed, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He seemed lost in thought, as though he were carrying a heavy burden. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about him, something that defied explanation. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the faint whisper of the wind against the car's windows. I couldn't help but feel as though I'd entered into some kind of twilight zone, a realm where reality blurred with the supernatural. And then, with a voice as soft as a whisper, the stranger began to speak. He told me things that sent a shiver down my spine, secrets about my past that no one could possibly know. He spoke of choices I'd made, regrets that haunted me, and dreams that had long been buried. My internal thoughts raced as I listened, my skepticism warring with a growing sense of wonder. How could this stranger know such intimate details about my life? It was as though he were peering into the depths of my soul. And here's the twist, my friend. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, the stranger's voice took on an urgent tone. He spoke of the decision I'd been agonizing over, the one that had been consuming my thoughts. He told me with an eerie certainty which path to choose. It was as if he held the key to the future in his grasp, and he was passing it on to me. As we neared a desolate crossroads in the middle of nowhere, the stranger instructed me to turn left. I did so without hesitation, my trust in him strangely unshakable. And then he was gone, vanished as if he had never been there, leaving me alone in the dark, my heart pounding and my mind reeling. I followed the stranger's instructions, taking the left turn as he had advised. As I continued down the road, a feeling of profound certainty settled over me, as though I were on the right path for the first time in years. The road stretched on, and I couldn't help but marvel at the strangeness of the encounter. It was as though fate had intervened, guiding me toward a future that was suddenly clear and vivid. I reached my destination with a sense of purpose that I had never known before. The decision I had been wrestling with seemed to have resolved itself, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was the right one. The encounter with the enigmatic stranger stayed with me long after that night. It was as though he had been a messenger from the cosmos, sent to deliver a crucial message and then vanish into the night. I often wondered who he was and how he had known so much about me, but the answers remained elusive, shrouded in mystery. So, my friend, sometimes the strangest encounters can hold the key to our future. The night drive that went wrong turned out to be a journey into the unknown, one that provided me with a revelation I'll never forget. And as I continue down this new path, I can't help but wonder if there are more secrets waiting to be revealed in the darkness of the night. Imagine you're in my shoes, driving through the dimly lit streets of a quiet suburban neighborhood on a chilly autumn night. The glow of porch lights casts eerie shadows on empty sidewalks, and the only sounds are the rustling of leaves in the wind. It's just another routine pizza delivery for me, but little do I know that tonight is going to be different. My name's Jack, and I've been delivering pizzas for a few years now. It's not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills. So there I am, behind the wheel, jamming to my favorite tunes and contemplating the next few hours of deliveries. But the first sign that something's amiss creeps in slowly. As I reach the address for my first delivery, I see that it's a seemingly abandoned house. The windows are covered with heavy curtains, and the lawn is overgrown. I double-check the address on the order, thinking it might be a prank, but it's legit. I can't help but feel a twinge of unease as I knock on the creaky front door. No one answers, so I leave the pizza on the doorstep and snap a quick photo as proof of delivery. As I turn to leave, I notice something peculiar, the faint sound of a child's laughter coming from the backyard. The hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, but I chalk it up to my imagination running wild. The next few deliveries go off without a hitch. The customers are real, the houses are well lit, and the aroma of sizzling pepperoni wafts through the air. Life feels normal again, but my sense of unease hasn't completely vanished. Then comes the third delivery. The address leads me to a pizzeria I've never heard of before. Mama Rosa's, a place that's supposed to have closed down years ago. I'm puzzled, but I check my phone just to make sure I got it right. The order is indeed from Mama Rosa's, and there's even a special request for anchovies. My stomach churns at the thought. I decide to give the number a call, but it goes straight to voicemail. Mama Rosa's Pizzeria, where pizza is our passion. A cheerful recorded voice chirps before the beep. I'm stumped. Despite my better judgment, I decide to head to the abandoned pizzeria. It's a dilapidated building, boarded up and in obvious disrepair. I approach the front door, half expecting to find it locked or chained shut, but it creaks open with eerie ease. The interior is even more bizarre. The place looks like it's frozen in time, a dusty, cobweb-laden time capsule of a pizzeria long forgotten. The ancient cash register sits on the counter, a warped and rotting pizza box next to it. It's a place untouched by human hands for years, and the smell of decay hangs heavy in the air. I stand there, feeling a mixture of confusion and apprehension, when I hear it. Footsteps, Faint at first, then growing closer. I spin around, but there's no one in sight. My heart races, and I consider making a run for it. That's when I see it, a shadowy figure emerging from the kitchen. It's a tall, hunched figure with long, gnarled limbs, its face obscured by a hood. It shuffles toward me, its steps slow and deliberate. Panic sets in, and I bolt for the exit, slamming the door shut behind me. As I race back to my car, I can hear the figure's eerie laughter echoing from inside the pizzeria. It's a sound that chills me to my core, and I can't help but wonder if I just stumbled into some kind of nightmare. With shaky hands, I speed away from Mama Rosa's, my heart pounding. I try to make sense of what I just experienced, but it feels like I've crossed into the realm of the supernatural. The laughter still echoes in my mind, a haunting reminder of the encounter. The next delivery is an address I've never seen before, and it's nestled deep within the woods. The GPS takes me down a winding, isolated road, and I can't help but feel a growing sense of dread. There are no houses in sight, just towering trees and an eerie silence that hangs in the air. As I reach the destination, I realize there's no house, no driveway, nothing but the dense forest. I check and recheck the address, but there's no mistake. This is where I'm supposed to make the delivery. A sense of foreboding washes over me, and I'm torn between following my instincts and completing the delivery for the non-existent customer. In the end, I decide to leave the pizza on the hood of my car and take a quick photo for proof. That's when I hear it, the distant sound of whispering voices. They're faint, like a sinister chore, and they seem to be coming from the depths of the forest. Fear gnaws at my insides, and I make a hasty retreat, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The strange deliveries continue, each one more unsettling than the last. I'm directed to abandoned buildings, desolate streets, and even a graveyard. It's as if I'm being guided to places where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs. And then comes the final delivery, an address that leads me to a remote, fog-shrouded lake. I'm alone, the car's headlights barely piercing the thick mist. There's a sense of foreboding that hangs heavy in the air, and my instincts scream at me to turn back. As I reach the edge of the lake, I can see a figure standing at the water's edge, their back to me. The mist swirls around them, and their presence exudes an otherworldly aura. I hesitate, debating whether to go through with the delivery or make a run for it. But curiosity gets the better of me, and I approach the figure cautiously. It turns around slowly, and I find myself face to face with the hooded stranger from Mama Rosa's. My heart seizes, and I'm paralyzed with fear. The stranger's face is still hidden, but I can feel their eyes on me, filled with an eerie, ancient knowledge. They beckon me forward, and with each step, I feel a strange compulsion to follow. The mist thickens, and the world around me becomes a surreal dreamscape. As we stand at the water's edge, the stranger finally speaks, their voice a soft, haunting whisper. You've been chosen, Jack, chosen to see beyond the veil, to glimpse the unknown. And here's the twist, my friend. As I stand there, my mind racing and my heart pounding, the stranger imparts a vision to me, a glimpse into a world that defies explanation. It's a world where reality and the supernatural coexist, where the line between the two is blurred. The vision is both beautiful and terrifying, a tapestry of the strange and the inexplicable. I see places and beings that defy logic, and I'm filled with a sense of awe and dread. And then, as quickly as it began, the vision fades, and I'm left standing by the lake, alone once more. The stranger has disappeared, leaving me with a sense of wonder and a haunting question that lingers in my mind. What was the purpose of that mysterious encounter, and what does it mean for my future? As I drive back to the pizzeria, the events of the night replay in my thoughts like a never-ending loop. I can't help but feel that I've stepped into the realm of the unknown, where reality and the supernatural intersect. It's a story I'll carry with me a tale of strange deliveries that took me to the edge of the unimaginable, and a sense of wonder that will stay with me forever. You ever had one of those nights that just gives you the creeps? Well, let me tell you about a pizza delivery gone wrong that still haunts me to this day. My name's Mike, and I've been slinging pizzas for years, but this night was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was a typical Friday evening, the phone at the pizzeria ringing off the hook with orders. I was swamped, but I'm used to the rush. The tips can be great, and that's always a good motivator. As I loaded up my car with a fresh pizza, I glanced at the delivery address, 1643 Willow Street. I didn't recognize the address, but it wasn't unusual. We delivered to new customers all the time. The night was dark and drizzly, the streets glistening with rain. The warm aroma of pizza filled the car as I navigated through the labyrinth of suburban streets. I was making good time, and I was looking forward to getting back to the shop for the next delivery. When I finally arrived at 1643 Willow Street, I was surprised to find a dilapidated, run-down house with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. It looked like something out of a horror movie, but I had a job to do. I rang the doorbell, and the sound echoed through the silent night. I could see the dim glow of a TV flickering through the curtains. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his 40s with unkempt hair and a wild look in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed the pizza, handed me a wad of cash, and shut the door in my face. It was weird, but I'd encountered my fair share of odd customers, so I shrugged it off. As I returned to my car, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The sensation was unnerving, and I scanned the area, but there was no one in sight. I dismissed it as paranoia, got back in my car, and started the engine. But the night was far from over. As I pulled away from 1643 Willow Street, I noticed a car trailing behind me. It was a beat-up old sedan, and it stuck to my tail like glue. My internal thoughts started racing. I knew I couldn't lead this car to the pizzeria, so I decided to take a detour, hoping the car would lose interest. I made a series of turns, but the car stayed on my tail, seemingly determined to follow me. The feeling of being pursued was unsettling, and I knew I had to shake my stalker. I took a few more turns, went through a few intersections, but every time I looked in my rearview mirror, that sedan was right there. It was then that I realized this wasn't a coincidence. This was someone with a purpose, someone who was relentless. Fear settled in, and I knew I couldn't lead them to the pizzeria or my home. I made a snap decision and headed toward a nearby shopping mall, hoping to lose my pursuer in the labyrinthine parking lot. I weaved in and out of the rows, making sharp turns, but that sedan kept pace. My heart was pounding, and I was running out of options. I knew I needed to get help, so I dialed 911 on my cell phone, hoping the police would arrive in time. But here's the twist, my friend. Just as I was connected to the dispatcher, the sedan made a sudden move, pulling up alongside me. I could see the driver's face, and it was contorted in a sinister smile. They reached for something in the car, and I knew I had to act fast. I swerved the wheel, narrowly avoiding a collision as I sped out of the parking lot. The dispatcher on the other end of the line was frantically asking what was happening, but I couldn't answer. I was too busy trying to stay alive. I knew I had to lose this maniac, so I pushed my car to its limits, racing through the streets. It felt like a scene out of an action movie, but the fear was very, very real. In the distance, I saw the neon sign of a 24-hour gas station, and I knew it was my only hope. I pulled into the station, my tires screeching as I parked haphazardly. I jumped out of the car, ran inside, and begged the attendant to call the police. The sedan pulled up to the gas station, and the driver just sat there, watching me with that same sinister smile. The attendant locked the doors, and I could see the flashing lights of a police car approaching. The driver of the sedan, realizing they were trapped, hit the gas and peeled away, leaving me shaken and out of breath. The police took my statement, and they assured me they would do everything in their power to find this psychopath. I drove back to the pizzeria, my hands still trembling, and I couldn't help but wonder what had triggered such a terrifying encounter. That night changed something in me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. I still deliver pizzas, but I'm always on high alert, never knowing when that psychopath might come back. And as for the 1643 Willow Street address, well, I can't help but wonder if that dilapidated house was just a trap, a setup to lure me into the clutches of a lunatic. So next time you order a pizza, my friend, spare a thought for the person delivering it. Because you never know what horrors they might encounter out there in the dark and quiet streets of the night. Pizza delivery, right? Sounds like a simple gig. Well, let me tell you about the weirdest pizza delivery job I ever had. My name's Mark, and I've been slinging pies for years, but nothing could prepare me for this. It all started when I got an order for a large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese, to be delivered to 221 Briarwood Lane. No big deal, right? Wrong, because 221 Briarwood Lane was one of those houses you see in horror movies, a big old creepy mansion that looked like it hadn't seen life in decades. I didn't think too much of it at first. Maybe some recluse ordered pizza every night. Who knows? The address was legit and the order was prepaid, so I couldn't really complain. As I pulled up in front of the mansion, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of person would live in a place like this. The lawn was overgrown, and the windows were boarded up, which only added to the eerie atmosphere. I rang the doorbell, and the sound echoed through the empty house. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I waited a while, growing more uncomfortable by the second. Maybe this was some kind of joke, or maybe they'd given me the wrong address. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a voice from inside. "Just leave it on the doorstep." It was a whisper, barely audible, but it sent shivers down my spine. I placed the pizza on the doorstep, took a quick photo for proof of delivery, and hightailed it out of there. The next day, I received another order for the same house. I thought it was a mistake, but the address and the prepaid order were all in order. So I headed back to 221 Briarwood Lane, my unease growing with each step. Once again, the mansion was empty, with no sign of life. I left the pizza on the doorstep and snapped a quick photo. It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. This bizarre routine continued for days, then weeks. Every day, I'd get an order for 221 Briarwood Lane, and every day, it was an empty house with a whispered voice instructing me to leave the pizza on the doorstep. I couldn't figure out what was going on. It didn't make any sense. But I was just a pizza delivery guy, and the paychecks were coming in, so I didn't rock the boat. I would drop off the pizza, take my photo, and get out of there as quickly as possible. One night, though, things took a dark turn. As I left the pizza on the doorstep, I heard something behind me. It was a low, guttural growl, and it sent a jolt of fear through my body. I spun around, but there was nothing there. That was the moment I realized that something was seriously wrong with 221 Briarwood Lane. This wasn't just a strange customer, it was something much, much worse. The next day, I got the same order, and my dread only grew. As I approached the doorstep, I felt a pair of eyes on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I left the pizza, snapped a quick photo, and turned to leave. But as I did, the door creaked open, and a cold wind rushed out from the dark interior. I stood frozen, unable to move, as I heard a voice. It was a raspy, haunting voice that sent chills down my spine. "Come inside," it whispered. "Join us." I should have run. I should call the police, but fear held me in place. I took a step towards the open door, and then another, and before I knew it, I was inside the mansion. The interior was a nightmare. It was like stepping into a haunted house attraction, but this was all too real. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. The air was thick with a foul, musty odor, and that's when I saw them, a group of figures, hunched and grotesque, shrouded in darkness. They were feasting on the pizza I delivered, tearing at the slices with their gnarled hands. I was paralyzed with terror, unable to move or even scream. The figures turned to me, their eyes empty sockets, their mouths filled with rotting teeth. They reached out towards me, and I knew I was about to become their next meal. But here's the twist, my friend. Just as they were about to grab me, I felt a searing pain on my arm. It was a bright, blinding light, and suddenly I was back outside the mansion, standing by the doorstep. I was alone, and the house was once again empty. The figures were gone, and the nightmare had ended. I fled from 221 Briarwood Lane and never looked back. To this day, I don't know what I stumbled upon in that mansion. I don't want to know. But I'll never forget the horror of those moments, and the inexplicable force that saved me from becoming part of their gruesome feast. So next time you order a pizza, my friend, remember that even the most routine job can take a terrifying turn, and be thankful for every delivery that goes off without a hitch. Ever had a call that sent shivers down your spine? I did, and let me tell you, it was a phantom phone call that left me haunted for weeks. My name's David, and I work a 9-to-5 desk job at a tech company, not the sort of guy who typically dabbles in anything eerie. But sometimes, the inexplicable happens, and you find yourself in the middle of a real-life horror story. It all began one rainy Wednesday evening. I had just finished dinner and was lounging on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when the call came in. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, and I hesitated before answering. It was an instinctual pause that would later haunt my every thought. "Hello," I said cautiously, but there was no response. Just a low, static-filled noise made my skin crawl. I assumed it was a bad connection and was about to hang up when I heard it, the faintest whisper. "Help me." The voice was desperate, and I could barely make out the words. I asked who it was, but the call ended abruptly, leaving me in a state of perplexity. Had it been a wrong number or a prank call? I shrugged it off, but the unease lingered. The next night, it happened again. Same number, same eerie static, and the same haunting voice. "Help me," it whispered. I racked my brain, thinking I might recognize the voice, but it was impossible. The caller's identity remained a mystery. My curiosity turned to concern, and I asked more questions, but the response was always the same: "Help me," followed by an abrupt hang-up. The phantom phone calls continued, growing more desperate with each passing night. Each time, I tried to trace the call, but the number led nowhere, as if it didn't even exist. The voice grew more pleading, more terrified, and it was as if someone was trapped, trying to reach out from the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My nights were consumed by the phantom calls, and I felt an overwhelming need to help this mysterious caller. But how could I, when I had no idea who they were or where they were calling from? One night, as the voice grew more frantic, I heard a strange noise in the background, a rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat. It was as if the caller was in some kind of peril, and it sent a chill down my spine. I begged for more information, but the response was always the same: "Help me," and then the call would end. The situation reached its breaking point when I received a call in the middle of a work meeting. I had silenced my phone, but it started vibrating on the table in front of me. The number was the same, and I excused myself from the meeting to answer it. "Please, you have to help me." The voice was desperate, on the brink of hysteria. I tried to keep the caller on the line, asked them to stay calm and tell me where they were, but all I received were frantic pleas for assistance. The thumping noise in the background grew louder, as if something were closing in on them. It was a nightmare. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, wondering what was happening. I hung up and explained that it was just a family emergency, but I knew I had to do something. I called the police and explained the situation to them, providing the number that had been haunting me for weeks. But here's the twist, my friend. The police traced the number back to a small old house on the outskirts of town. They rushed to the location, and I followed, consumed by a sense of urgency. When we arrived at the house, it was shrouded in an eerie silence. The thumping noise was gone, and there was no sign of any struggle or distress. The police entered the house cautiously, and I stood at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. They searched every room, but it was clear that the house had been abandoned for years. There was no one there, no sign of the phantom caller. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I was left with more questions than answers, haunted by the voice on the other end of the line. Who had been making those calls, and why? What had happened to them, and why had they reached out to me? The phantom phone calls stopped as suddenly as they had begun, leaving me in a state of unease and confusion. I never found out who the caller was or what had happened to them, and the mystery continued to gnaw at me. So next time you receive an unfamiliar call, my friend, remember that it might not be a wrong number or a prank. It could be something far more sinister, a phantom call that leaves you with more questions than answers, and a sense of unease that lingers long after the call has ended. You ever had a call that sent shivers down your spine? I did, and let me tell you, it was a phantom phone call that left me haunted for weeks. My name's John, and I'm just an ordinary guy with a regular job. Nothing extraordinary about me. But sometimes, the inexplicable happens, and you find yourself in the middle of a real-life horror story. It all started on a chilly winter evening. I was settling into my cozy living room, wrapped in my favorite blanket, watching TV when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, and I hesitated for a moment. It was an instinctual pause that would later haunt my every thought. "Hello," I said cautiously, but there was no response. Just a low, static-filled noise that made my skin crawl. I assumed it was a bad connection and was about to hang up when I heard it, the faintest whisper, "John." The voice was faint, but there was no mistaking it. It was my grandmother's voice. My grandmother had passed away years ago, and her voice on the other end of the line sent a shiver down my spine. I asked who it was, but the call ended abruptly, leaving me in a state of shock. It couldn't be. It was impossible, right? My grandmother was gone. I tried to rationalize it, thinking it was some kind of sick prank, but the unease lingered. The next night, it happened again. The same unknown number, the same eerie static, and the same haunting voice. "John," it whispered. I didn't know what to think. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be a prank. My grandmother's voice was unmistakable. I asked more questions, but the response was always the same. "I miss you, John," followed by an abrupt hang-up. The phantom phone calls continued, and it became clear that it wasn't just my grandmother's voice. It was the voices of other relatives who had passed away, my grandfather, my aunt, and even my childhood friend who had died in a car accident. They all spoke to me, their words filled with longing and affection. I couldn't explain it, and the mystery consumed me. I wondered if I was losing my mind, or if I had somehow stumbled upon something beyond our understanding. The voices grew more emotional with each passing night, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that they were trying to tell me something important. One night, my late grandfather's voice came through, and he said, "The attic, John. Go to the attic." I knew my grandfather's house had an attic, but I'd never been up there. It was always locked, and I didn't have the key. That night, I felt an overwhelming compulsion to go to the attic. The voices of my relatives were urging me to go, and I couldn't resist. I searched the house until I found the key to the attic hidden in a drawer. The wooden stairs creaked as I climbed up into the dimly lit space. It was filled with old, dusty furniture and forgotten relics of the past. It felt like a time capsule of memories. In the corner, I found an old chest covered in cobwebs. I reached for it, my heart pounding, and when I opened it, I found a collection of letters and photographs. They were letters my grandmother had written to me, photographs of family gatherings, and handwritten notes from my friend who had passed away. As I read through the letters, I realized that these were the things I had forgotten, the memories that had faded with time. The attic was a treasure trove of the past, and my relatives had guided me there to remind me of the love and connections we had shared. But here's the twist, my friend. Just as I was immersed in the memories, the attic grew colder, and I could see my breath in the air. The voices of my relatives filled the space, and I felt a strange sensation as if they were all around me. And then, in the dim light of the attic, I saw them, faint, translucent figures of my loved ones. My grandmother, my grandfather, my aunt, and my friend. They were smiling, their eyes filled with love and understanding. They reached out to me, and I felt a warmth, a sense of peace, wash over me. It was as if they were saying goodbye, as if they were assuring me that they were at rest and that they would always be with me. The attic filled with a blinding light, and the figures slowly faded away. The voices grew softer, more distant, until they were nothing but echoes in the darkness. I descended from the attic with a sense of closure, a feeling of connection with my departed loved ones that I had never experienced before. The phantom phone calls stopped, and I was left with a sense of gratitude for the messages from beyond. So next time you receive an unknown call, my friend, remember that it might not always be a wrong number or a prank. It could be a connection to something beyond our understanding, a message from the other side, and a reminder that our loved ones are never truly gone. Have you ever received a phone call that sent shivers down your spine? I did, and let me tell you, it was a phantom phone call that had me questioning reality. My name's Mike, and I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. But sometimes, even the most skeptical among us can't explain the unexplainable. It all began on a chilly, moonless night. I was curled up on my couch, engrossed in a book, when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number, and I hesitated for a moment before answering. It was an instinctual pause that would later have me questioning everything. "Hello," I said cautiously. Silence greeted me, and I could hear only a faint, eerie static on the other end. My gut told me to hang up, but just as I was about to, a whisper came through. "Mike." The voice was soft, barely audible, but it sent a jolt of fear through my body. It was a voice I knew, a voice that was impossible to forget. My best friend Alex. Alex had died in a car accident 5 years ago. This couldn't be happening. I asked who it was, but the call ended abruptly, leaving me with my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced. It couldn't be Alex. He was gone, but the voice had been unmistakable. The same voice I used to hear when we'd hang out together. I told myself it was some kind of cruel prank, but the unease lingered. The next night, it happened again. Same number, same eerie static, and the same haunting voice. "Mike," it whispered. I couldn't deny it any longer. It was Alex's voice, and it was imploring me to listen. I asked more questions, but the response was always the same. "I need to tell you something," followed by an abrupt hang-up. The phantom phone calls continued, and they grew more insistent with each passing night. It was as if Alex had a message he needed to convey, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I didn't understand how this was possible, but I couldn't deny that it was happening. One night, the message became clear. "The tree, Mike. You need to visit the tree." The words were cryptic, but I knew exactly which tree Alex was referring to. It was a massive oak tree in the park where we used to spend our childhood afternoons. It was where we had carved our names into the bark, where we had shared secrets and dreams. The next day, I drove to the park, my heart heavy with a mix of anticipation and dread. The tree was where I had last seen Alex before the accident. It was a place filled with memories, both joyful and painful. As I approached the oak, I felt a sense of foreboding. It was as if I were walking into the unknown, as if the boundary between the living and the dead was blurring. I reached the tree and found a small weathered envelope tucked into a crevice. Inside the envelope were letters, notes, and drawings that Alex and I had exchanged as kids. They were mementos from our childhood, memories of a time when life was simple and carefree. It was as if Alex was reminding me of the bond we had shared, the friendship that had meant so much to both of us. But here's the twist, my friend. Just as I was immersed in the memories, I heard laughter behind me. I turned to find my friends, grinning like Cheshire cats. It was all a prank, an elaborate ruse to convince me that Alex was reaching out from beyond. They explained how they had used voice-changing software, how they had researched our childhood and planted the envelope at the tree. It had all been a setup, a grand illusion to play on my skepticism and fear. Part of me was relieved, but part of me was furious. They had exploited my memories, played on my emotions, and made me believe in the impossible. It was a cruel prank, and I couldn't believe they had gone to such lengths to pull it off. The phantom phone calls were revealed to be nothing more than a sinister joke, and I was left questioning the nature of reality. It had all seemed so real, so uncanny, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. So next time you receive a mysterious phone call, my friend, remember that it might not always be what it seems. It could be a prank, a test of your beliefs, or a reminder that reality is often more complex than we can fathom. And be wary of those who play with your emotions, for they might lead you down a path of uncertainty and doubt. Gather round the campfire, my friend. I've got a tale to tell, a legend that's been whispered through generations, and it all starts with a seemingly ordinary camping trip in the heart of the woods. My name's Tom, and I've always been a sucker for campfire stories, but this one, well, it's a bit different. It was a crisp autumn evening when I, along with a group of friends, decided to embark on a weekend camping adventure. The forest was alive with the rustle of leaves and the symphony of cicadas, but the atmosphere had that eerie chill that only comes when the sun dips below the horizon. We set up our campsite near an old oak tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers toward the sky. As the night settled in and the flames of our campfire danced, my friend Mark began to recount a local legend. They say, he began, leaning in closer, that deep within these woods there's a creature that's been lurking for centuries. He spoke of the Wendigo, a creature from Algonquian folklore. According to the legend, it was a malevolent spirit that possessed humans, transforming them into ravenous, cannibalistic beings. We all laughed it off as a classic campfire tale, but there was something about the way Mark told it that sent shivers down my spine. As the night grew darker and the fire burned low, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The wind whispered through the trees, and the shadows cast by the flickering flames seemed to take on a life of their own. But I shrugged it off as simple nerves, my imagination running wild. We eventually retired to our tents, and I drifted off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of nature. I awoke to a piercing scream. It was Mark. I rushed out of my tent to find him standing in the clearing, trembling and pointing into the darkness. I saw it, he stammered. I saw the Wendigo. We all scrambled out of our tents, and our flashlights passed the night, revealing nothing but the dense forest around us. Mark's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. It was out there, he insisted, watching us. We searched the area, but found no trace of any creature, and the atmosphere was charged with fear. Mark's encounter with the Wendigo, or whatever he had seen, had shaken us all. As we huddled around the campfire, Mark's story took on a life of its own. We were on edge, our nerves raw, and every rustle of leaves or hoot of an owl sent us into a frenzy. But here's the twist, my friend. Just as we were about to pack up and head back to civilization, we heard something in the distance. A low, mournful howl that chilled us to the bone. It was a sound like no other, an eerie, guttural cry that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. Our flashlights passed the darkness, and there, in the shadows, we saw it, a figure gaunt and emaciated, with eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural hunger. It was the Wendigo, or at least what we believed to be the Wendigo. We were paralyzed with fear as it approached, its movements graceful and predatory. But just as it came into the light of our campfire, it seemed to dissipate like smoke in the wind. It was as if the creature had never been there. We were left in a state of shock, unable to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Had it been real, or was it a shared hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? We couldn't be sure. As we packed up our camp and made our way back to civilization, the legend of the Wendigo had left an indelible mark on us. It was a tale that had come to life, or at least we believed it had. So next time you gather round a campfire and hear a legend, my friend, remember that sometimes the line between myth and reality can blur, and the darkness of the woods can hold secrets that defy explanation. And be wary of what you might encounter in the heart of the wilderness, for there are some legends that are best left undisturbed. All right, gather round the campfire and let me tell you a story that still gives me chills when I recall it. My name's Jack, and I've always been the outdoorsy type. There's something about the wilderness that's both soothing and unsettling, a balance that's hard to explain. A few years ago, I went camping with a group of friends in a remote part of the forest. We were all about enjoying the simplicity of nature, and what better way to end a day in the wild than by huddling around a campfire. We set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees that blocked out the moonlight. The air was filled with the sounds of the nocturnal creatures, and the campfire crackled and hissed, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to taunt us with their secrets. As the night grew darker, I began to notice something peculiar. The fire's glow, which had been steady, started flickering erratically. I assumed it was just a result of the wind, but the breeze was oddly still. I kept an eye on it, and sure enough the flames would sputter and die down, only to roar back to life moments later. My friends noticed it too, and we exchanged uneasy glances. We dismissed it as a strange but ultimately harmless phenomenon. The conversation around the fire gradually shifted to ghost stories and campfire legends. One of my friends, Sarah, began to share a local tale about the woods we were in. She spoke of a spirit, an entity that had been rumored to inhabit these very woods. It was said to be a guardian of the forest, a presence that protected the wilderness from those who meant harm. We all listened intently, but just as she was about to reveal the legend's twist, the fire went out completely, plunging us into utter darkness. I reached for my flashlight and quickly switched it on, illuminating worried faces all around. We tried to restart the fire, but it was as if the wood had turned against us. No matter how much we tried, it refused to catch, like it had become allergic to flames. As the darkness pressed in, our unease grew. We had enough flashlights to keep the area lit, but the absence of the campfire's warm glow left us feeling vulnerable. We began to wonder if there was something more to the legend Sarah had been sharing. It was then that strange things began to happen. The wood seemed to come alive with eerie noises. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, and the wind carried whispers that sounded like distant voices. But we were alone, weren't we? We decided to pack up and leave, thinking that maybe the spirits of the forest weren't too thrilled with our presence. But just as we were about to head out, the fire came back to life, roaring brighter and hotter than before. It was as if the very act of leaving had offended it. As we watched the flames dance, we realized that the occurrences we had witnessed, the flickering, the unexplained noises, were all connected to the fire. It was the epicenter of these strange events. But here's the twist, my friend. As we huddled around the now vibrant fire, we heard a sound that sent shivers down our spines. It was a voice, a whisper that seemed to come from the flames themselves. "Stay." We all looked at each other, horrified and entranced. The voice seemed to echo in our minds, urging us to remain. It was both alluring and menacing, like a siren's call that promised warmth and danger in equal measure. We had to make a choice: stay and risk whatever force was behind these strange occurrences, or leave and risk incurring the wrath of the forest. In the end, we couldn't resist the pull of the fire. As we sat there, entranced by the dancing flames and the mysterious voice, we couldn't help but feel that we were being watched. The shadows cast by the fire seemed to elongate and twist, taking on forms that were impossible to discern. And then, without warning, the fire went out once again, and this time it stayed extinguished. The darkness that enveloped us was suffocating, and we felt a deep sense of dread. We fled into the night, unsure of what we had encountered, but certain that we had narrowly escaped something beyond our comprehension. The forest had whispered its secrets, and we had listened. So the next time you're out in the wilderness and the campfire starts acting strangely, my friend, remember that the woods may hold secrets that are best left undisturbed. There are forces in nature that defy explanation, and sometimes it's better to heed their warnings and retreat to the safety of the known. I've always been a fan of camping, even more so those late-night campfire stories. They say there's a thin line between reality and legend, but my camping trip last summer blurred that line like never before. What began as a typical getaway with a few friends soon turned into a nightmare. Campfire legend we'd scoffed at ended up becoming our worst nightmare. We set up camp in a secluded forest, the tall pines casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. The night was so still that you could hear the leaves rustle and the insects whisper. My friends Rachel, Tim, and Jake and I sat around the crackling fire, reminiscing about our college days. Tim, always the storyteller, decided to entertain us with the tale of the wandering shadows. As he began his story, the flames danced, creating strange patterns that seemed to mimic his words. The wandering shadows, he said, were malevolent spirits that haunted these woods. According to local law, they were once people who had gotten lost in the forest and were never seen again. Their restless souls were said to seek revenge on the living for their untimely demise. I laughed along with the others, thinking it was just Tim's way of adding some spooky atmosphere to our camping trip. The firelight cast sinister shadows on his face, enhancing the effect of his story, but I knew it was all in good fun, or so I thought. Later that night, as we drifted off to sleep in our respective tents, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. My companion's laughter and Tim's story continued to haunt my thoughts. With a sigh, I tried to brush it off and closed my eyes. The night was unrelentingly dark, and I suddenly woke to strange whispers. It was like the wind was carrying hushed voices through the forest. I stepped out of my tent to investigate, but all I could see was a dense fog that had rolled in from nowhere. The darkness was suffocating, and I couldn't even see the campfire's faint glow. Rachel, Tim, Jake, I called out, but there was no response. The silence that followed was deafening. I stumbled back to my tent and grabbed my flashlight. I shone it toward the campfire area, and the sight I beheld left me frozen with terror. My friends were there, but they weren't themselves. Their eyes glowed an eerie shade of crimson, and their faces were contorted into grotesque masks of anger. In a panic, I called out to them, but they didn't seem to recognize me. Instead, they approached the campfire, speaking in tongues I couldn't understand. I watched in horror as they began to chant and dance around the fire, their movements growing increasingly frenzied. It was like they were being possessed by some malevolent force. I couldn't comprehend what I was witnessing. Were these the wandering shadows Tim had told us about, or was this some sick joke they were playing on me? With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but the moment I turned it on, it was like the world had shifted. The campfire, my friends, the entire forest, everything around me morphed into a nightmarish version of reality. I realized that the legends weren't just stories. They were warnings, a desperate plea from those who had encountered the malevolent spirits. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, and I didn't know if I'd ever wake up. I stayed hidden in my tent, watching my friends spiral further into madness. Their chants grew louder, more frantic, and their dancing became violent. It was as if they were possessed by something far more sinister than I could ever comprehend. And then it happened. The most horrifying and heart-wrenching part of the night. Their possessed bodies began to turn on each other. The frenzied dance around the fire devolved into a bloody battle, and the forest echoed with their screams. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that I was the only one left untouched by the malevolent presence that had overtaken my friends. I couldn't save them, and I couldn't understand why I had been spared. Was it some twisted game, or did the spirits have something more sinister in mind for me? Hours passed, and as dawn's faint light broke through the trees, the violence ceased, and my friends lay lifeless, surrounded by the haunting forest. The malevolent spirits, or whatever they were, had finished their macabre dance. I emerged from my tent, trembling and filled with dread. The once beautiful forest now felt like a cursed place, forever scarred by the horrors of that night. The campfire, now a pile of smoldering embers, gave off a faint, eerie glow. I stood there, alone and shaken, unsure of what to do next. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the horrors I had witnessed. And then it hit me, a terrifying realization that sent shivers down my spine. I wasn't spared. I was chosen to carry the legend forward, to become a part of the wandering shadows. My friends had been transformed into malevolent spirits, and now it was my turn to dance, to chant, and to haunt the next unsuspecting camper who ventured into these woods. As I began to feel a strange compulsion, an urge to join the cursed dance, I knew that I could never escape the campfire legend. The line between reality and myth had blurred, and I had become a living nightmare, trapped in the never-ending cycle of the wandering shadows. You know, I've always had a thing for old, abandoned places, especially the ones that come with chilling legends. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that I found myself tangled up in a nightmare at the very place I used to love as a child, the old Millington Mansion. I grew up in a small, sleepy town, surrounded by thick forests and a fair share of ghost stories. The Millington Mansion, an imposing, rambling estate, sat atop a hill just on the outskirts of town. As kids, my friends and I would dare each other to sneak into the overgrown, forgotten garden and spy on the mansion's eerie facade. Back then, it was all just innocent fun, the thrill of trespassing. One summer, I received news that the mansion was going to be demolished, making way for a new housing development. It was like a piece of my childhood was about to disappear, so I felt a compelling urge to revisit the place that held so many memories. As I approached the mansion on a cloudy afternoon, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The sky had an uncanny shade of grey, and the air was heavy with an eerie silence that gnawed at my nerves. It was as if the very atmosphere was trying to warn me away. The gate, once padlocked, was hanging open, its rusty chains swaying in the breeze. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding, as memories of my childhood trespassing adventures flooded my mind. I shrugged them off and stepped through the gate. The tall weeds and tangled vines seemed to welcome me, as if the mansion had been waiting for my return. The old house had lost its luster over the years. Its once grand facade was now a crumbling relic, its windows shattered and its walls draped in ivy. In the dim light, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia mixed with unease. I ventured inside, my footsteps echoing through the empty, echoing halls. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Dust-covered furniture and faded wallpaper were all that remained, hinting at the life that once thrived here. As I explored further, my footsteps echoing through the hollow mansion, I came upon a room that held a gruesome surprise. There, on the floor, lay an ancient journal. It was filled with the ramblings of a previous explorer, someone who had visited this place with the same curiosity as mine. The journal spoke of strange occurrences, of whispers in the night, and the feeling of being pursued by unseen figures. It was like a veil of darkness had settled over the mansion, and the person who had written the journal had fallen victim to its malevolent presence. I couldn't help but shiver as I read the words that echoed my own eerie experiences. Despite the dread that had settled upon me, I continued to explore, each step leading me deeper into the mansion's mysteries. I found myself in a narrow corridor that led to an ornate, dusty door. I pushed it open, revealing a room that sent a shiver down my spine. In the center of the room stood an ornate, full-length mirror. Its glass was warped and tarnished, reflecting a grotesque, distorted version of myself. It was like a portal to a nightmare realm, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. I felt a sinister pull, like the mirror was beckoning me to step through, to cross the threshold into the unknown. My reflection in the mirror began to change, contorting into a grotesque, shadowy figure. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back from the cursed mirror. It was then that I realized I was not alone. The mansion, this once beloved place, was not abandoned at all. From the shadows emerged a group of spectral figures, their eyes empty voids, their faces twisted in pain and rage. They moved towards me, their movements ghostly and unnatural, like marionettes under a malevolent puppeteer's control. I turned and fled, the mansion's oppressive atmosphere pressing down on me like a lead weight. But it was like the very walls of the house conspired against me, shifting and rearranging themselves to keep me trapped inside. The once familiar layout of the mansion had become a maze of endless corridors and dead ends. My heart raced, and my breath came in short, frantic gasps as I continued to flee from the relentless spirits that pursued me. It was like a never-ending nightmare, and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was caught in a web of darkness, a web spun by the malevolent forces that had taken root in the mansion. In a desperate bid for freedom, I found myself back in the room with the cursed mirror. The spectral figures closed in on me, their eyes burning with a malevolent fire. With no other options left, I reached out and touched the mirror. A searing pain shot through me, and the world around me seemed to shatter. I found myself back outside, standing before the dilapidated mansion, as if I had never set foot inside. The malevolent spirits were gone, and the mansion was silent once more. I stumbled away from the old Millington mansion, my heart still pounding with fear. I couldn't help but wonder if it was the mansion itself that had lured me back, that had drawn me into its sinister grasp, or if the legends were true and the place was truly cursed. The experience had left me with a chilling realization. The past should remain buried, especially when it comes to places like the old Millington mansion. Some things are best left as memories, and I would never forget the horrors I had encountered within those decaying walls. It was a lesson I'd carry with me, a reminder that some legends are not to be taken lightly, and some places are best left abandoned. Hey, I've got a story that'll send shivers down your spine. It all started with a trip to an old airport, one I'd always heard about as a kid, but never visited. This isn't your usual horror tale. It's a real-life nightmare that happened to me, and I've got to get it off my chest. So there's this place called Willowbrook Airport. It's out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods, and you'd never know it was there unless someone told you. In its heyday, Willowbrook was a buzzing hub of activity. They say it was a vital link during World War II, with pilots and cargo planes coming and going, day and night. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, my friend Mark and I decided to check it out. The airport had been abandoned for years, and our curiosity finally got the best of us. It was a warm, sunny day, and we figured it would be a fun little adventure. As we approached the place, I couldn't help but notice how the air suddenly grew colder, and a heavy feeling settled in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I didn't listen. Instead, I followed Mark, and we made our way onto the cracked runway, weeds growing through the asphalt like nature was trying to reclaim it. The old control tower loomed above us, its windows shattered, and the entrance covered in graffiti. The entire airport was silent, except for the eerie creaking of a long-forgotten windsock flapping in the breeze. It was as if the place was holding its breath, waiting for something. Mark and I explored the main terminal building first. It was a dim, dusty place, strewn with discarded luggage and torn-up flight schedules. The air was musty and thick, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. We climbed a rickety staircase that led to the control tower, and that's when things started to get strange. The stairs creaked and groaned under our weight, but as we ascended, I could have sworn I heard distant chatter, like a radio signal playing in the background. I exchanged a puzzled glance with Mark, who was just as spooked as I was. There was no power, no working radios, and yet we could hear it. The voices grew louder as we reached the control room, and my heart raced. Something was very wrong. When we finally pushed open the door to the control room, what we saw sent a chill down our spines. It was as if the room had been frozen in time. The old-fashioned radio equipment was humming to life, and a ghostly figure in an old pilot's uniform was seated at the control panel. He didn't look at us, just continued talking into the microphone. I couldn't believe my eyes. Mark and I exchanged another terrified glance. We watched in silence as the pilot's monologue grew more frantic. He talked about a storm, a crash, and something else, something darker. It was like he was reliving a terrifying moment from the past. The whole scene felt unreal, like a glitch in the fabric of time. Suddenly, the figure turned to us with hollow eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a spectral whisper, and then he vanished, leaving nothing but the hum of static in his wake. We stumbled out of that control room, shaken to our cores, but we weren't about to let it end there. We needed answers. As we continued our exploration, we found an old photograph in the airport's records room, showing the very pilot we had seen, his name etched below the picture. We discovered he was the sole survivor of a crash that occurred on this runway during a fierce storm in the 40s. Everyone else on board had perished. The more we dug, the more we realized that Willowbrook Airport was cursed, frozen in time, and haunted by the spirits of the past. We couldn't just walk away from this mystery. We needed to understand what was happening. As night fell, we returned to the control tower, determined to uncover the truth. The eerie radio transmission began, but this time we were ready. We asked questions, hoping for answers. The pilot's responses were fragmented and cryptic, but we could piece together the story. He had been on a cargo plane carrying a mysterious and valuable artifact. The storm had hit, and the plane went down on the very runway where we now stood. The pilot had survived the crash, but the artifact had been lost, scattered across the forest in the wreckage. It was a relic of incredible power, and the storm had unleashed its dark energies, trapping the souls of everyone involved. Mark and I exchanged a glance. realizing that the only way to break the curse was to find the scattered pieces of the artifact and return them to their rightful place. We had no choice. The pilot's voice grew more desperate, and the static intensified as he reached out to us. So, with the pilot's guidance, we ventured into the forest, following the spectral remnants of the plane's wreckage. It was a treacherous journey, but the spirits of the crash victims guided us, and after hours of searching, we found the lost pieces of the artifact buried deep within the earth. As we placed the final piece back on the runway, a blinding light filled the night sky, and the entire airport trembled. The pilot's voice in the control room grew calm, grateful, and he thanked us for breaking the curse. With that, the radio fell silent. The storm that had been brewing throughout the night finally broke, and we stood in the pouring rain, watching as the airport slowly crumbled into dust, fading away like a forgotten memory. The spirits had been freed, and their restless souls could finally find peace. As Mark and I walked away from the site, we couldn't help but feel a sense of closure, a shared experience that bound us together. We had ventured into the heart of a cursed location, but in the end, we had set free the spirits of the past and given them the peace they deserved. Now, I'm sharing this story with you because sometimes the most chilling tales are the ones that happen to real people. It's a reminder that some places hold secrets that are better left undisturbed, and that not all curses can be broken. So, the next time you hear of an old abandoned location, think twice before you decide to explore, because you never know what you might awaken. You ever wonder what's lurking in the shadows when everyone else is asleep, and you're the only one patrolling an empty, dimly lit office building in the middle of the night? I thought my late-night gig as a security guard would be uneventful, but it turned into a real-life horror story I won't ever forget. Let's rewind a bit. It all started when I took a job as the night shift security guard at Richmond Office Tower. Nestled in the heart of the city, this place was a massive skyscraper that looked pretty ordinary by day, but by night, it transformed into something out of a nightmare. The rumors about this building being cursed had always swirled around the city, but I'd never paid them much attention. I needed the money, and it seemed like an easy enough gig. Patrol the empty floors, keep an eye on the cameras, and call it a night. Piece of cake, right? On my very first night, as I strolled through the vacant, dimly lit hallways, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The air felt heavy, and the silence was deafening. I shook it off, thinking it was just my nerves getting the best of me, but the feeling wouldn't go away. My shift was uneventful, for the most part. I'd make my rounds, check the surveillance cameras, and occasionally have a quick chat with another night guard, Henry, who manned the building next door. He'd been working these night shifts for years and told me all the classic ghost stories about the building, with its dark history of suicides, failed businesses, and rumored hauntings. The real creepiness started on the third night. I was on the 23rd floor, peering through the massive windows of the city lights below when I saw something move. At first, I brushed it off as a figment of my imagination, but then it happened again. A shadowy figure, silhouetted against the city's glow. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, my flashlight's beam trembling as I inched closer. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing there, just an empty, eerie office. I chalked it up to exhaustion and spent the rest of the night on edge. Each time I checked a darkened corridor, I could have sworn I heard faint whispers and soft footsteps behind me. The thought that I might not be alone sent shivers down my spine. A few nights later, the strange occurrences took a more disturbing turn. I was reviewing the surveillance footage in the security room when I spotted something I couldn't explain. A security camera on the 12th floor captured a woman in a tattered dress, her long hair obscuring her face. She drifted in and out of view, leaving a trail of smeared, wet footprints. I zoomed in, my heart pounding, and there she was, looking directly into the camera. Her eyes were empty, devoid of life or any trace of humanity. I watched as she moved silently through the dark corridor, disappearing into the shadows. That image was etched into my mind. In a panic, I radioed Henry, who reassured me it was just a glitch in the camera system. But I knew what I saw. That woman was as real as you and me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was tied to the building's cursed history. The nights grew longer, and my anxiety skyrocketed. I felt like I was spiraling into madness. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, and strange noises echoed through the empty building. I'd often hear footsteps echoing down the halls, but when I investigated, there was no one there. One night, as I was patrolling the 15th floor, I heard a faint, distant voice calling my name. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but the sound sent a chill down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to run, to leave this place behind. But I couldn't abandon my job. As I made my way back to the security room, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something sinister at play, something that was drawing me deeper into the cursed history of Richmond Office Tower. I had to get to the bottom of it, and my search for answers led me to the building's archives. The dusty records reveal a history of tragedy and despair, suicides, bankruptcies, and a string of failed businesses that had occupied the tower over the years. It was as if the building itself had a way of devouring its occupants, sucking their hopes and dreams dry. One name stood out in the archives: Emily Richmond, the original owner of the building. She had gone mad after her husband's death, believing that his spirit was trapped within the tower. Legend had it that she had taken her own life within the very walls of the office tower. My investigation led me to the tower's basement, where I uncovered an old locked room filled with dusty relics and decaying mementos. Amid the ruins, I found a journal that belonged to Emily Richmond. Her words were filled with grief, guilt, and a desperate desire to free her husband's spirit from the cursed building. It was then that it hit me. The spirits that haunted Richmond Office Tower were not malevolent but tormented. Emily's husband, and perhaps others, were trapped here, their souls unable to find rest. The curse that had plagued this place was born from their agony. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I knew I had to help them find peace. I performed a ritual to communicate with the spirits, seeking to understand their plight and offer them solace. The spirits revealed the source of their torment and their longing to be reunited with their loved ones. But there was a twist I hadn't anticipated. The spirits were not the only ones trapped within the cursed building. As the ritual unfolded, my own body grew cold and my vision blurred. The spirits had found a way to bind me to the tower, ensuring that I would never leave. Now I continue to walk the darkened halls of Richmond Office Tower, forever linked to its tragic history. I've become a guardian of the lost souls, helping them find their way to the afterlife. I often hear their whispers and feel their presence, but I've accepted my fate. As I share this story with you, remember that there are places in this world where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs, where the past and the present are intertwined in a web of tragedy and despair. Richmond Office Tower is one such place, and its curse is a reminder that sometimes, even in the most ordinary settings, darkness can lurk just around the corner.